All right. Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and we have another fantastic show for you today. We have a debate, another exciting debate. As you all know, I love hosting debates, and last week we hosted a 2-on-2 debate, and this week we also have a 2-on-2 debate, and I'm excited to have that for you today. I have Dr. David Wood, I have AP, I have Dr. Tahir and Umar Nasir with me, and we are going, and they're representing True Islam UK, and today we're going to be debating the Bible or the Quran as it concerns the crucifixion of Jesus, which makes more sense. So I'm glad you guys have joined me, and I do appreciate it. And if you have yet to do so, make sure you know to subscribe to The Gospel Truth and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any shows that are coming up here on The Gospel Truth, interviews, commentaries, or debates. So make sure you are glued in by hitting that subscribe button. If you don't know, The Gospel Truth is not only on YouTube, but also Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, and TikTok. So make sure you flow over to those platforms and subscribe and follow on those platforms as well. Most of you know, if you don't know, The Gospel Truth is also on podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. So if you have to do so, follow and subscribe on those podcasting platforms. I do have some updating to do on the podcast, so bear with me until I'm able to get that done. All right, until I'm able to get that done. All that said, we do have some shows that are coming up here in the future on The Gospel Truth that I want you guys to be aware of. All right, coming up after this debate, I have Nadir Ahmed and Andrew Wilson. Islam, is it a religion of peace? And so we're going to be debating this topic. Should be a fun one. Both of these guys. Now I think Nadir has been on before, but I think Andrew, this is Andrew first go around on The Gospel Truth. So hopefully you guys will be able to check us out. After that, I have a Hebrew Israelite debate. Jared Hammond and Zachariah, they're going to jump on. This is salvation for the Gentiles. Can the Gentiles have salvation? And so we're going to be talking about the subject matter. Should be a fun debate. Hopefully you'll be able to join us. After that, I have William Arbridge and Father Joseph, and we're going to be discussing or debating the concerning papal supremacy. So hopefully you guys will be able to jump on and watch this debate. Should be a fun one. Then after that, I have Matt Slick and Jake Gailing jumping on. They're going to be debating, is the Trinity implied in the Old Testament? Is the Trinity implied in the Old Testament? So it should be a fantastic debate, a fun debate to watch. Trinity debates are always fun, so hopefully you guys will be able to join us on that debate. All right. And lastly, I'll be speaking at an open air theology conference in February of 2025. This is going to be this is my first conference I'm going to have a chance to speak at, so it should be a fun one. And we have some nice individuals that's going to be there. Hopefully you guys will be able to come on and jump. It's going to be in Tullahoma, Tennessee. So if you guys will be able to come out and join in on the fun at this conference. If you're interested in going, you can go ahead and visit openairtheology.org, and you will see all the information there to sign up for the conference. All right. All that said, that is all the announcements that I have here. And as I said, we have a fun-filled debate that's coming up here today. And let me bring these guys in so they can introduce themselves. Prior to that, they remember last time they came on, they debated what was it? Man, I forgot that. What's the topic they debated? They'll remind me. I totally forget because I have so much on my mind. I'm a busy man. What's up, fellas? How y'all doing?
Good.
Good.
Sounds like you know what you're finding out what it feels like to get old, Marlon.
Memory is definitely lapsing, man. And I've forgotten that you guys' previous debate that you debated like a month ago or a couple months ago.
It was a treat for the Prophet Muhammad, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's it. Thank you. Your memory is you're a doctor, so y'all better have better memory than me. Sure, y'all holding them titles. Y'all better have better memory than me. But yeah, thank you guys for coming back. I appreciate you guys. This should be a fun one. Before we jump into the topic in the debate, I do want to give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves to the audience. Tell them what you do, blogs, YouTube channel, whatever it is. Let them know what you do, and then we'll come back for getting into the debate format and all that good stuff. All right. So start with Dr. David and AP. You guys got it. Go ahead and give a quick introduction to yourself.
Well, I'm David Wood. I'm a Christian. I grew up as an atheist, became a Christian when I was, I think, 20 years old, and got into Islam as an area of interest, mainly because my best friend in college was a Muslim who tried to convert me to Islam. We ended up getting in a series of discussions and so on. And so anyway, that's how I ended up getting involved in Islam, and part of the reason we're having this debate right now.
Yeah, I'm AP, Ridvan Ademir, Apostate Prophet. I'm not David Wood. I am a former Muslim and YouTuber who decided to, after practicing and studying the faith for quite a long time, decided to go out and speak on it. And then I accidentally became more popular than I thought I would, and was initially on the side of atheism in terms of theology, religion in general. Recently started going into a different direction, but have been very much of the view that Islam as a religion is pretty false and also pretty dangerous. And Christianity and Judaism, for example, are religions that made the world a better place. And yeah, that's why I'm here today.
All right, all right. Thank you guys for those introductions. Dr. Ahir and Umar, you guys are up next for a quick introduction. You guys got it.
Umar, would you like to go first?
No, please.
I'm Tahir. I'm an intensive care doctor working in the UK. I'm an Ahmadi Muslim, and we're here today representing the True Islam UK platform, which is a platform of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community UK.
I'm Omar. I am by profession a psychiatrist working in the UK, and I'm a guest speaker for True Islam UK, as my brother said.
All right. Cool, guys. Thank you guys for those introductions. Really do appreciate it. And so now we're just going to jump right into this.
Hey, what?
Yo, what you got?
One quick question. When you say brother, do you mean like Ahmadi brother, or is that like you guys actually brothers?
No, we're brothers.
Brothers in faith, brothers in blood, brothers in every way.
Oh, cool. Interesting. Nice.
Yeah. I meant to ask that last question the last debate too, because I was all like, dang, both of y'all got the last name Nasir? What's the chances of that? Good stuff, guys. All right, guys, we are going to jump into this debate. The topic of this debate is the crucifixion in the Quran, or the Bible versus the Bible, which makes more sense. We're going to start that with 20-minute opening statements, and then we're going to have, by each team, then we're going to have 2 rounds of rebuttals, each round having 10 minutes of time allotted to each round for each team. And then we're going to jump into a 30-minute crossfire where both teams will get 4 minutes each, sort of back and forth. And the equated time is total 32 minutes. And then we'll have 5-minute closings. And then we'll have a 45-minute Q&A from the audience. Sounds good? All right. So are we going to be, in this particular topic, David and AP, do you guys want to present first, or Umar, Tahir, do you guys want to present first?
I think we went first last time, so I can't quite remember, but I think that's the case. So perhaps if they go first this time, it'll be a bit fairer.
All right.
Oh, I thought we were under the impression that...
Oh yeah, the format you sent. Yeah, the format you sent me, Marlon, was on was that they were going first, because there's no affirmative or negative here. But I'm fine going first as long as AP is.
I think we're also fine going first if needed, but up to you guys.
I don't have a preference, so whatever you guys prefer. If you whether you want to go first or second, it's up to you.
All right, David, and AP, you guys.
No, let them decide.
Okay.
I don't mind either way. It's just that I think we went first last time. I just wanted to make it even so that you guys could have the opportunity to go first this time. That was all.
That's fine with me.
Oh, you can go ahead. That's fine. Fine.
Okay.
Wait, who's going?
All right. So, David, and AP, you guys are going first. Right?
Colin, I think we're going to have to choose here.
Oh man, David and AP, you guys are going first, right? You guys are good.
Fine.
All right, you guys are good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
All
Marlon, just give me a chance to. I have a PowerPoint up here, but as you know, I'm pretty terrible with technology, so just let's get that up before we start our time.
We could have a debate on who's going to go first.
Let's see. Window. Right, got that. Okay, and I just click full screen or something, right?
Yeah, you can click presentation mode, and then you should be good.
I don't think so. Should be fine. You guys see that?
Yes, we do.
All right, so we're all good.
We're all good. Let me make sure your timer is good to go here, David, before you go. So you got 20 minutes there. All right, you're good to go, David.
AP, you can start whenever you want. I don't hear AP. Is AP there?
Yeah, now, okay, go ahead, AP. Start. I didn't start your time yet. I meant to get your audio in, so go ahead and you can go ahead and start now.
Okay, do you hear me now?
I hear you, yes.
So thank you, Marlon, for hosting this debate, and thank you, Tahir and Omar, for presenting the Ahmadi position and for giving us the opportunity to compare the Quran and the Bible. For Christians, the crucifixion and death of Jesus are connected to other doctrines such as the atonement, the resurrection. But if we're focusing on the crucifixion, the biblical account is that Jesus was sentenced to death by the Romans, who flogged him and nailed him to a cross. Jesus then died on the cross. Very simple and straightforward. By contrast, it's kind of difficult to understand what the Quranic account actually is, because Muslims can't exactly agree on what the Quran is claiming. Most Muslims over the centuries have believed that the Quran promotes what's called substitution theory, the theory that Allah disguised someone else and made this other person look like Jesus. Other Muslims, such as the Ismaili Shias, reject substitution theory and believe that Jesus did die by crucifixion. Then there are the Ahmadis, who believe that Jesus was crucified, but that he survived crucifixion because of powerful healing spices, and then packed his bags and moved to India, where he continued. So Muslims themselves can't really figure out what the Quran is saying. It's confusing, especially because Allah claims that the Quran is perfectly clear. It doesn't really seem that way. But let's look at the evidence. Let's start with the Bible. Does the biblical account of the crucifixion make sense? Think about 4 points. David, are you going to move with the slide, or what are you doing? Okay. So we'll start with the Bible. First, Jesus repeatedly predicted that he would be killed. Mark 8, verses 31 to 33 says, "And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed. And after 3 days rise again." And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." So Jesus told his followers that he would be killed. Peter said, "No, this will not happen to you." And Jesus condemned Peter for saying that he wouldn't be killed. And Jesus said to him, "Get behind me, Satan," because Peter claimed that he wouldn't die, because Peter objected to this. But that's exactly what Muslims claim. So according to Jesus, the Muslim view comes directly from hell and is pretty much satanic. In Mark 9, verse 30 to 32, it says, "They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise.' But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him." Mark 10, 32 to 34. "And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, 'See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and deliver him over to the Gentiles, and they will mock him, and spit on him, and flog him, and kill him. And after 3 days he will rise.' Mark 10, verse 45 says, 'For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.'" This is only the book of Mark, and there are more verses about Jesus' death in the book of Mark. The other Gospels contain other passages where Jesus says that he would die, that he would be killed. Yet Muslims who claim to respect Jesus say the exact opposite of what Jesus said and promote a position which Jesus specifically called satanic. Second, numerous sources, both Christian and non-Christian, report Jesus' death. The 4 Gospels, the book of Acts, the letters of Paul, including an early Christian creed that Paul received from Jesus' original apostles, the letter to the Hebrews, 1 Peter, and Revelation. These are biblical sources on the death of Jesus. We also have writings from the next generation Christians, people like Clement of Rome, Polycarp, and Ignatius, who knew one or more of Jesus' apostles, and they confirmed that Jesus died. We even have non-Christian sources, such as Tacitus and Josephus, who report Jesus' death. Considering that Jesus was a Jewish carpenter and the Romans crucified tens of thousands of people, it's quite amazing that so many sources reported his death. Third, we know how Roman crucifixion worked. It was very efficient. When we combine our historical knowledge of Roman crucifixion with modern medical knowledge, any theory suggesting that Jesus didn't die would sound ridiculous. Today we think of the crucifixion just as nailing someone to a cross, but Roman crucifixion was a three-step process. The first step was scourging, which was sometimes called the half-death, because the victims would be half dead by the time it was finished. The Romans used flagrum made of leather thongs with chunks of bone or metal woven into the strands, designed to remove human flesh. Depictions that you may have seen in movies are not exaggerated. We have records of people being beaten until their veins and arteries were exposed, or until their bones were showing, or until their intestines spilled out, and so on. And that was just the beginning. Step 2 was nailing the victim to a cross, then letting him hang there while the blood drained out of him. Once he stopped gasping for breath, the Romans would then know that their work was almost done. There was still the matter of what to do with the body. So generally, the Romans would leave a corpse on the cross and let it rot and be torn apart and eaten by wild birds and jackals. But if they needed to pry someone off a cross, they would stab him through the heart with a sword or a spear, just to make sure that he was dead. Not the sort of process anyone's going to walk away from. Now, when we consider Roman practices of scourging, crucifixion, and delivering a death blow, we can see why a research team writing for the Journal of the American Medical Association concluded their article by saying, interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge. Fourth, there is a consensus among scholars, Christian and non-Christian, that Jesus died by crucifixion. Historians and New Testament scholars regard Jesus' execution as one of the best established facts of the ancient world. I briefly want to say here, I'm not a Christian. I don't abide by this. I don't have any dog in this race, but it's quite obvious to me that this is one topic that is not questionable. Jesus was crucified and killed. But let's let the scholars speak. Atheist New Testament scholar Gerrit Ludemann declares that Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. John Dominic Crossan of the Jesus Seminar says that there is not the slightest doubt about the fact of Jesus' crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Marcus Borg, another member of the Jesus Seminar, states that Jesus' execution is the most certain fact about the historical Jesus. Jewish scholar Pinchas Lapid affirms that Jesus' death by crucifixion is historically certain. According to Paula Fredrickson, a convert to Judaism, the single most solid fact about Jesus' life is his death. He was executed by the Roman prefect Pilate on or around Passover in the manner Rome reserved particularly for political insurrectionists, namely crucifixion. And the Romans were not known to be sloppy at doing their job. And Bart Ehrman says, one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. I myself spoke to Bart Ehrman and interviewed him on this, and he said very clearly that it is undisputed that he was indeed crucified and killed. So keep in mind that these are non-Christian scholars, and they're not simply saying that we have some evidence that Jesus died by crucifixion. They're saying that it's indisputable, that it's historically certain, that it's one of the most certain, clear facts of history. So we can only conclude that any worldview that denies Jesus' death by crucifixion is out of touch with reality and with the facts. Thank you.
All right, everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, good. What about the Quranic view? AP went through the biblical view. What about the Quranic view? Since Muslims can't agree on what the Quran is saying, we'll look at the two positions that are most relevant here. There are other positions, but the two that are most relevant here are the majority, which is substitution theory, and the Ahmadi position, which is swoon theory. The position, the dominant position over the centuries in Islam, again, Jesus was never crucified. Instead, Allah miraculously disguised someone else to make him look like Jesus. Then this was crucified. But everyone thought that it was Jesus because Allah did an amazing job tricking everyone. There are all kinds of problems with substitution theory. I'll briefly mention a few. First, substitution theory portrays Allah as a kind of cosmic trickster who starts false religions through deception. If Jesus didn't actually die, but Allah made people think that he died, the real reason billions of people are now convinced that Jesus died is that Allah deceived them by taking someone else and making Jesus and having this other person crucified. Christianity wouldn't have gotten off the ground without belief, death by crucifixion. So Allah is actually the one who set Christianity in motion through deception. Notice, according to the majority Muslim view, the dominant Muslim view over the centuries, you can't trust your senses because Allah makes you see things that aren't real. Even if you see someone die with your own eyes, Allah might be tricking you. And when you have an omnipotent deceiver running the universe, how do you know what to believe? How do you know we're even having a debate right now? Maybe Allah is making you think we're debating when in reality we are sleeping. Second, the Islamic view portrays Jesus as a total failure. The Jesus of the Quran spent years preaching Islam, only to have his life's work sabotaged by Allah, who tricked the world into thinking that Jesus died by crucifixion, ultimately giving rise to Christianity. According to the Quran, Jesus' followers were devout Muslims, but they must have disappeared rather quickly without so much as a whimper, because we have no that any Muslim followers of Jesus even existed. So the Islamic Jesus couldn't win a single lasting Muslim convert. They must have all been led astray, something like that. And Jesus accomplished absolutely nothing of any lasting significance. It's all negative. He ended up being the founder of a false religion. Third, Surah 61 verse 14 of the Quran claims that Allah aided the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost over those who rejected Jesus. But wait, someone said I'm echoing. Is that true?
No, you're echoing. It's just that the audio is like cutting out just a tad bit. Your audio is just cutting out just a tad bit, but you're fine. You're transmitting your audio. It's fine. It's just like cutting out like a little bit of the word as you're speaking. But okay. It's clear now. But you're fine. All right, no problem.
Okay. So, all right. So Surah 61 verse 4 of the Quran here claims that Allah aided the true followers of Jesus until uppermost over those who rejected Jesus. Followers of Jesus who became uppermost over those who opposed Jesus were Christians who did Jesus' death and resurrection. See the problem? Allah says he helped the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost. The followers who became uppermost believed in Jesus' death and resurrection. Those are the ones Allah helped become uppermost. Our Muslim friends tell us that Jesus didn't die and that he didn't rise from the dead. So according to our Muslim friends, Allah must have aided the wrong people. Fourth, 7 verse 157 of the Quran says that Christians were still reading the gospel during the time of Muhammad, and Surah 5 verse 47 of the Quran commands Christians to judge by the gospel. Since we know that the gospel read by Christians in the 7th century proclaimed Jesus by crucifixion, Muslims are actually contradicting the Quran when they say that Jesus didn't die by crucifixion. Get it? Allah affirms the gospel that Christians had in the 7th century, which is the gospel that we still have tells us over and over again, like a beating drum, that Jesus died on the cross. So how can we believe the Quran when the Quran orders us to judge by scriptures that contradict the Quran? Our Muslim friends think they can avoid this problem by saying that the gospel was corrupted. But notice, if the gospel is corrupted, that's ordering Christians to judge by a corrupt book. And not only does Allah order Christians to judge by a corrupt book, he's the one who corrupted it, according to our Muslim friends. According to our Muslim friends, Jesus never died by crucifixion. We open the gospel and we read about Jesus dying by crucifixion. Where did people get the idea Jesus died by crucifixion? From Allah, who tricked people into believing that Jesus died by crucifixion. So if the gospel was corrupted, who corrupted it? Not the Apostle Paul, not someone. According to our Muslim friends, the gospel was corrupted by the omnipotent deceiver they worship. So the majority view in Islam is that Jesus was never crucified. Allah tricked people into believing that Jesus died by crucifixion. Why would he do that? Allah knows best. Why did Allah undermine the life's work of his own prophet? Allah knows best. Why did Allah help the wrong Christians? Allah knows best. Why did Allah affirm the inspiration, preservation, and authority of the Christian scriptures, which in turn affirm Jesus' death by crucifixion? Allah knows best. Does this view make any sense whatsoever? Not a bit. But Ahmadis believe they have a superior view, the swoon theory. Ahmed was in a difficult position. He wanted to be known as a Muslim, so he couldn't say that Jesus died on the cross, but he still needed a dead Jesus because he wanted to be known as, according to Orthodox Islam, Jesus is the Messiah and Jesus is still alive. So Mirza Ghulam Ahmed can't be the Messiah. But if Mirza Ghulam Ahmed can convince his followers that Jesus died, that leaves room for a new Messiah. Guess who that would be? So Mirza Ghulam Ahmed said that Jesus survived the crucifixion, then moved to India and eventually died. Does the swoon theory make sense? Well, apart from some general problems like contradicting the clear claims of Jesus, having absolutely no evidence to support it, all the early sources being against it, and so on, I'll share 3 problems with the Ahmadi view. First, the Ahmadi view destroys the only appealing feature of what the Quran says about this topic. The only appealing aspect of the traditional Muslim view that Jesus was replaced, unlike, let's say, Judas, is that Jesus was rescued from. Now, the traditional view is flawed in every other conceivable way, but at least Jesus wasn't hurt. That's something. But the view doesn't even have that going for it. People torture Jesus horribly, according to their view, and God allows it for no apparent reason. Then, once Jesus has been tortured and people think they've killed him, only then does God rescue him. Seems this divine rescue comes a little too late. Second, the Ahmadi view portrays Allah and Jesus and Muhammad as completely incompetent. Think about it. Jesus survived the crucifixion. He was put in a tomb. He was wrapped up with scissors. He got out. Allah then tried to convince Jesus' followers that he survived the crucifixion, but no one understood the message. Instead, Jesus' followers became convinced that he died on the cross. Allah wanted to correct this misunderstanding, so more than 5 centuries later, he sent Muhammad with the Quran. But almost everyone who read the Quran concluded not that Jesus survived crucifixion, but crucified at all. He was replaced by someone else. Allah wanted to correct this misunderstanding, so nearly 13 centuries later, he sent Mirza Ghulam Ahmed with some absurd claims that contradict everything we know about what happened to Jesus on the cross. Poor Allah, he's the absolute, bar none, worst communicator in all of history, according to the Ahmadis. According to Ahmadis, more than 2 billion Christians and nearly 2 billion Muslims are wrong about what happened to Jesus because everyone keeps misunderstanding Allah, Jesus, and Muhammad. The Ahmadi view kind of seems like a massive blasphemy. Third, David Strauss put the nail in the coffin of the swoon theory more than a century ago when he wrote, "It is impossible that a being who had stolen half dead out of the sepulchre, about weak and ill, wanting medical treatment, who required bandaging, strengthening, and indulgence, and who still at last yielded to his sufferings, could have to his disciples the impression that he was a conqueror of death and the grave, the prince of life, an impression which lay at the bottom of their future ministry. Such a resuscitation could only have weakened the impression which he had made upon life and in death. At the most, could only have given it an elegiac voice, but could by no possibility have changed their sorrow into enthusiasm and have elevated their reverence worship. Jesus' followers worshipped him as their risen Lord. They believed that he rose from the dead and appeared to them. Seems like he must have made quite an impression on them, not the sort of impression you'd get from someone who somehow just barely survived crucifixion and was in terrible need of medical assistance. Putting all of this together, the Bible says that Jesus was beaten and crucified by the Romans. This lines up with everything we know from other sources and is supported by everything we know about Roman crucifixion. Scholars from across the theological spectrum agree that Jesus' death by crucifixion is a historical fact. The Quran, by contrast, can't even be good by its most devout readers. The majority view portrays Allah as a cosmic trickster. The Ahmadi view portrays Allah as the worst communicator ever. Ahmadis are willing to throw Allah, Jesus, and Muhammad under the bus, all to support Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. I'll just say that if you're willing to throw your own God and your own prophets under the bus, your false messiah, you need to drop your false messiah.
All right. Thank you, David and AP, for the presentation. Appreciate it. Just a note that audio, it wasn't severe cutting, David and guys. Just the audience was like, oh, why is David Mike cutting out a little bit? It was severe. You communicated just fine. I think Tahir and Umar got what you were saying, understanding. So it wasn't a big deal. But nonetheless, thank you guys for the opening statement. So now we're going to jump over to Dr. Tahir and Dr. Umar for their presentation. And let me get those guys on the screen. All right. So are you guys presenting a PowerPoint or anything? Or are you guys going to go on without a PowerPoint?
We have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
Umar, you're muted.
Sorry, I was going to say, can you pause our clock when we switch over, if that's okay?
Yeah, I'll start the clock when you guys get the PowerPoint up and everything. Yep. And that little chime, I don't know if you guys remember last time with the little chime. That little chime is a 1 minute indication that you got 1 minute left in your presentation. So yeah, I look like I do see it. Are you going to be actually presenting, Dr. Umar, or is Dr. Tahir going to be presenting?
Yeah, we're going to go back and forth in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get your audio there. All right. So you guys have 20 minutes and I'll start your time as soon as you begin to speak.
Okay. So thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. You're coming through great.
Okay. Right. So crucifixion of Jesus in the Quran versus Bible, which makes more sense? So let's get right into it. So there are three aspects to this debate question. There's the crucifixion of Jesus in the Quran. There's the crucifixion of Jesus in the Bible, and then there's the question of which makes more sense. And I'm going to begin with which makes more sense to help us understand the principles of what we should look for when we assess two different narratives. So in terms of what makes more sense, one particular way that sometimes people go about understanding and comparing or contrasting different explanations is they go by, for example, one framework which is known as the inference to the best explanation. So this is a way by which you can select different narratives to decide which one actually fits the facts better and makes more sense. There are four general principles.
Sorry, the screen's very pixelated. Is that just for me?
That'll be just for you, Omar.
Okay.
That's just for you. Look at it on YouTube, it's fine.
Thank you.
Is that right, Marlon?
Yeah, what was the question, Dr. Umar?
It looks very pixelated for me. I apologize if that's just me.
Yeah, it's just that main screen. That main screen, it just has a little pixelation, but on YouTube, okay. It's clear. Yeah.
Give us a bit more time for this interruption. I apologize.
Oh, no problem.
So sorry about that. Inference to the best explanation is a way by which we understand what is a better explanation between different possibilities, and it has generally understood to have four different components. There's explanatory power. So an explanation should be able to explain the minimal fact of the observed event. Then there's probability, so an appeal to causes that have been witnessed and are known to cause the event in question are to be preferred over previously unseen or unknown causes. And then whichever explanation is simpler, known as Occam's razor, is something that we should prefer. So explanations that have the fewest assumptions when multiple explanations are available. And finally, coherence. The explanation should fit and should not contradict either itself or within a broader coherent framework. So I wanted to give a simple example just to help people get into the way of thinking. So if I go outside in the morning and see that my car and only my car is wet, this is an example often used by intelligent design theorists in particular. If I go outside in the morning and see that my car and only my car is wet, and the ground immediately underneath my car is wet, but otherwise the ground is dry and other cars of my neighbors are not wet, which is the best explanation? Is it that a cloud appeared and rained only over my car during the night? Is it that aliens targeted only my car with moisture? Is it that a prankster deliberately wet my car overnight, or someone spilled water, or a sprinkler system hit only my car? Or is it that my wife washed the car in the driveway this morning? So I'm just going to give you what I think is probably the best answer. It's probably that your wife washed the car in the driveway this morning. And the way we can theorize through this is we can, look at these potentials and say, well, look, a cloud appeared and rained only over my car. The explanatory power, all of them theoretically could explain the events. But clouds raining only over your car or aliens coming, these are appealing to unknown causes. Okay, so they're likely to be pretty much further down the list. Then there's Occam's razor. An explanation of a prankster or a sprinkler system is less likely because, again, it requires multiple assumptions. And in terms of coherence, the wife washing the car fits within the repeatable pattern of your life. So the best explanation of these is that the car was washed by the wife. Reason is important in making decisions. The Quran says, for example, that Allah makes his wrath descend on those who would not use their reason. And after this presentation, I'll ask the Christians a rhetorical question, which is that if you wish to hold fast to your interpretation, despite there being a better explanation for it, because it is a miracle, then that is absolutely fine. But please just don't pretend like it has any rational basis. The Christian hypothesis is pretty straightforward. Jesus died on the cross. He was then miraculously resurrected by God after 3 days, and he appeared to his followers in bodily form, and that was the proof of his resurrected body. And here are some quotes to support though. These are, as I point out later as well, as Umar points out, these are interpretations. They are statements of belief, but nevertheless, it's quite difficult to find evidence that Jesus rose from the dead from the Bible because nobody actually witnessed it. There's just interpretations and opinions afterwards. The Islamic view is that Jesus is a prophetic Messiah. This is a quote from the Quran where an angel comes to Mary and gives her the glad tidings that she will give birth to the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, honored in this world and the next, and of those who are granted nearness to God. And the Quranic hypothesis is survival. It is not actually the substitution theory. And the Quran actually definitively puts aside the substitution theory. It states, the Jews said that we did kill the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, whereas they slew him not, nor crucified him. And that means to crucify to death in particular in this context, because they're responding to the allegation of death. But he was made to appear to them like one crucified. Now, this statement, he was made to appear to them like one crucified, is shubbiha lahum. It's the third person masculine singular form. And so it can mean he, she, or it was made to appear to them like one crucified. Now, it's quite obvious that if I'm looking at, you can't say that Jesus looked like Jesus was made to appear like one crucified unless the onlookers were actually looking at Jesus on the cross. Had he, as per the substitution theory, gone up to heaven 3 days earlier, then whoever was on the cross whom they were looking at, that could not be referred to as Jesus. And this statement of the Quran, therefore, would be an incorrect statement. He was made to appear to them like one crucified. The fact, therefore, that the Quran refers to Jesus as being made to appear dead means that the substitution theory must be incorrect. This interpretation is grammatically possible because the passive structure does not preclude the subject being Jesus, but it does preclude anybody else because the subject of the verse is only Jesus. The substitution theory suggests that someone else was made to resemble Jesus and was crucified in his place. However, this interpretation introduces a new subject, the substitute, that is not mentioned anywhere in the verse. There is no subject of the verse other than Jesus, and so if Jesus was made to appear dead, then the onlookers must have been looking at him on the cross. Otherwise, he was made to appear to them as so becomes a false statement. So if I refer to David Wood and I say he appears ill, I can't be looking at Jim and say he appears ill referring to David Wood. If I do so, then in actual fact my statement becomes false. So the fact that the Quran states that Jesus appeared to them as so means that he was in actual fact on the cross, and it is a direct refutation of the substitution theory. So the Quranic view ultimately is that Jesus was put on the cross and that he survived the crucifixion attempt, and that was the fulfillment of the prophecy that he himself made. Now, how do we decide between these two hypotheses? There's one hypothesis that states that Jesus was on the cross, he died and came back to life. The other one is that he was put on the cross, he survived, and his appearing later was the evidence that he had survived. Just like if you see a person walking around a few days after an assassination attempt with the wounds of the assassination attempt on them, the immediate thought you're going to have is not, oh, you came back to life. The immediate thought you're going to have is, oh, wow, you survived. That's amazing. So the way we decide between the two hypotheses, and I'm going to hand over to Omar, is we focus on the repeated events in particular, which are minimally accepted facts between the Gospels. In other words, the events that have consensus largely between the Gospels. And we analyze the events for the criteria laid out before you, which is fit the evidence, probability, known versus unknown cause, Occam's razor, and coherence. So I'm going to hand it over to Omar now. Omar, if you want to present.
Yeah.
Can we just pause our time, please?
Can you see this? Can anyone see this?
Yes, we can see it. We got you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brother Tahir. So you've been talking about these two hypotheses, the resurrection hypothesis that Jesus died and came back to life versus the survival hypothesis. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually analyze this with reference to the events mentioned in the New Testament itself and see which one do they support. There are various statements in the New Testament. Some of them do conflict. But what you want to do, if you're actually trying to figure out what really happened, is you want to have a look at what are the minimally accepted facts. What are the things that no one can disagree with? And when you line them up in a row and you take the whole picture, what image appears? What can you derive from it? So we're going to be looking at the different events, the established events of the crucifixion event. And then we're going to figure out which one it supports. But I want to do a little bit of context setting because I think that's really important. Let's remember that both the resurrection hypothesis and the survival hypothesis assume that there was divine planning involved. In the resurrection hypothesis of the Christians, Jesus was God. He planned his suicide and his resurrection. In the survival hypothesis of the Holy Quran, as presented by the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Jesus was a true prophet, believed that God supported him, but he was not all-knowing. So these are some differences that when you look at the events, you can see, does it fit more with this one or that one? Okay. Now, context, Deuteronomy 21. We've mentioned this before. It says that anyone who is hanged on a tree is under God's curse. Now, that's the question. Is it more in support of the resurrection hypothesis or the survival hypothesis? I would say certainly this is more in favor of the survival hypothesis because according to the Christians, God hanged himself and therefore God would be under his own curse. It's very difficult to understand and has been historically how God can be distant from himself, how he can be accursed of himself. Indeed, this is the reason why the Jews tried to hang him, was to show that he was false, for him to validate their criticisms and to validate their attempt to prove that he was false seems remarkably unwise from the all-knowing. Now, the next statement, which is repeated, I believe, 3 times, Matthew 12, Luke, and Matthew 16, is the sign of Jonah, where Jesus says that you shall be shown no sign except the sign of Jonah. Now, what was the Jonah? The sign of Jonah, as we know, is that Jonah was on the ship. The lots were cast. He was thrown overboard, and he was in the tumultuous ocean and the storm. And he should have died in that situation. There's no doubt he should have died. Anyone normal person would have died. But Jonah cried out and he prayed to God. And God saved him by putting him in the belly of the whale. He said, "Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God, as my life was ebbing away." So the sign of Jonah is that of survival in extreme circumstances when you should die, showing God's protection and the acceptance of prayer. Now, Christians believe Jesus was crucified to death on the cross. Therefore, Jesus did not survive in extremely deadly circumstances. Thus, Jesus did not fulfill the sign of Jonah. But the sign of Jonah fully accords with the survival hypothesis of Islam because he was put on the cross. He should have died under normal circumstances, but as a sign of God's favor, God saved him. So this is in favor of the Ahmadiyya and the Islamic perspective. The next bit of context setting is this issue of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And this, again, is something Jesus mentions at least twice in the Gospels. He has said that he is sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. We all know that in Judea at the time, there are only 2 tribes out of the 12 tribes of Israel. The others were scattered over Asia. And he said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." According to the Quranic view and the Ahmadiyya view, he survived the crucifixion and went to them and died there. According to the Christian view, he never saw them whatsoever. So actually, if we assume that Jesus is true, no matter on which hypothesis, this supports the survival hypothesis rather than the resurrection hypothesis. Because if he is true, then he must have fulfilled this. Okay? Now, the actual events of the crucifixion. As we know, Jesus knows that he is going to be taken. He knows that Judas is going to betray him. And the night before he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, he takes a few of his disciples and he goes to pray. And he says to them, I am deeply grieved even to death. Remain here and stay awake from me. This is Matthew 26. And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. And then he says, so could you not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. He describes it as a trial. So Jesus is aggrieved. Jesus is praying for the cup to pass, i.e. this trial. And in fact, he actually calls it a trial. So my question to the Christians and to all the viewers is, does this accord with the idea that Jesus himself planned to die? He's praying the night before. He calls this whole event a trial. He is deeply aggrieved and he asks his companions to pray with him. This to me does not sound like this thing is going according to plan. On the survival hypothesis, however, he is praying for the trial to be averted or for him to stay strong through it so that his truth can be manifested. So this accords fully with the survival hypothesis. Now, another very interesting event is that, after this, Jesus is arrested, he's put in front of Caiaphas, and he's put in front of Pilate. And Matthew 27 records something very interesting, and that is the dream of the wife of Pilate. She says, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, Matthew records, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, Pilate's wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him. Now, Pilate's wife had a terrible dream informing her of Jesus' innocence. Obviously, dreams are used as a form of communication from God in the Bible as well as in other religions. She seeks to influence Pilate in favor of saving him. And Pilate then, he says, will you choose Jesus or Barabbas? And they choose Jesus. And then something very interesting happens, which is that Pilate puts him up just before the Sabbath. And this is significant because the Sabbath, which starts on the Friday night, no one can be hung on that time. So Pilate knew that Jesus would only be up there for a matter of hours, essentially. Okay. Now, here's the question. Why would God try to influence Pilate through the dream of his wife to save Jesus if Jesus wanted to die and was God? According to the resurrection hypothesis, Jesus' other part of himself, God the Father, revealed this in order to save Jesus, but actually he wanted to die all along. That doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that Jesus was innocent and that this was part of God's plan to save Jesus. And he was then put up just before the Sabbath. So let's then have a look at the crucifixion itself. He is on the cross and he cries out, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, he apparently has no way out. He is asking God if he is being forsaken, and then he becomes, at the very least, unconscious. He seems to give up his spirit. Okay? Again, the question is, does this seem like a man who has a plan? Does this seem like things are going according the way that he wanted them to go? I would argue certainly not. He is saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? He doesn't think that this is the whole point of his ministry. He doesn't think that this is the whole point of his being in the world. He is saying, why have you forsaken me? What is happening here is he does not know how he would be saved. He knew he would be saved, but the hour of death seems to be approaching so quickly that he cries out like this. This certainly supports the survival hypothesis. Now, okay, Jesus' side. Let's have a look at the legs being unbroken. Let's have a look. So then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. These are the two soldiers on either side. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. So he appeared dead. And we know that people, when they faint, they can appear dead, especially they're on a cross. They're far away. You can't see them very closely. So his legs were not broken. Therefore, no mortal injury was given. And this is important because legs were broken in order to hasten death. Right? He had only been up there for 6 to 9 hours. People don't die that quickly. And if you think I'm making that up, this is recorded in Josephus, the famous Jewish historian. If you look at the highlighted part at the end, it talks about how he talks about 3 people who had been crucified. 2 of them died, 1 recovered. So from the 1st century, we know that people do survive crucifixion. The idea that this is some inevitable death, especially when they've only been up for 6 to 9 hours, is completely false. So what's here? To me, this is equivocal. We can't say from that this is clearly on the resurrection side or the survival side, because he could have been dead or he could have been alive at this point and merely unconscious. So we have to actually look at the next verse, which says, instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified, so that you may also believe his testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. Blood and water pour out immediately. The testifier marks the significance of this. Blood and water do not pour immediately without the pressure of a bleeding heart. Any doctor who's taken blood knows that within minutes, sometimes blood coagulates. The idea that this comes out so quickly in a freak, it indicates that it actually comes out at a level straight. So it's coming out with pressure, indicates that actually Jesus is alive. So his legs weren't broken. So he suffers no mortal wound. He has a beating heart. So he is alive. This supports the survival hypothesis. Now, he is then taken down. And just as a side note, Pilate is surprised that he's already dead. So it's not true that he was inevitably going to die, because even Pilate, who used to execute people all the time, is surprised dead. And then he's taken down and he's given over to Josephus and Joseph of Arimathea, and Nicodemus. And they apply a huge weighty concoction of myrrhs and aloes. These are healing herbs. This kind of burial tradition was not actually normal. It is, especially with the huge quantities of myrrhs and aloes that are actually applied to him. These are healing herbs. Now, why would you apply unusual quantities of healing herbs to Jesus if they thought him to be dead? You wouldn't. This supports the survival hypothesis. He was wounded but not dead. Therefore, they're trying to heal his wounds so as to aid his recovery. And really, he's seen as a body. He's seen afterwards, after 2 days, he appears to his disciples and he says, touch and see, for a ghost does not have... They think he's a ghost, let me say. They were startled and terrified. They think he's a ghost because they thought he had died, which again is slightly confusing if his entire ministry was talking about how he's going to be killed and then raised up again. Why would the disciples be confused as to why he was alive? He says, touch and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. So he is not a ghost. Why is he in the same body? Is it because he died and went to hell and then returned, or because he never died? I believe it's because he survived. So actually, all of the major events of the crucifixion support the survival hypothesis. I'll hand it back to my brother, but to carry on.
That Omar, if you could continue doing the slide, please, and go back one slide.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, go forward.
You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I understand. So the final point we want to point out is extra biblical evidence that the Hindu scriptures from the late first century, mention Isa Masih, a Jesus Messiah figure in Kashmir, who says he is born of a virgin, calls himself the Son of God, and whose religion is love, truth, and purity of the heart, that he was persecuted in his own land and he fled to the east. So that is, in a broad... That's time right there. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so now we're about to enter to our first round of rebuttals, and the rebuttal round will be 10 minutes each for each team. And so we're going to bring David and AP back up for their first round rebuttal, and then I will start let me get that timer up there. Who's going to be doing the rebuttal, or are you guys going to share that time?
We're going to go back and forth. We're going to go do me first and then David.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll both do it. He'll start, and then we'll both jump in.
All right, sounds good. I'll start your time as soon as you begin to speak, AP.
All right. So in our opening statements, we made 4 points about the biblical view of the crucifixion of Jesus. We showed that Jesus repeatedly predicted that he would be killed, explicitly killed, and that he rebuked his own disciples, saying, "Get behind me, Satan," for saying he wouldn't die. Second, we showed that we have numerous ancient sources reporting Jesus' death, Christian and non-Christian. Third, we showed that Roman crucifixion practices make it absurd to think that he survived. Fourth, we showed that there is scholarly consensus that Jesus died by crucifixion. At this point, I want to bring up an interesting or something that stands out to me as funny. in the opening speech of our opponents, the Occam's razor was applied, and it was said Jesus died, then he appeared later. We would conclude the most likely explanation that he survived, not that he died and got resurrected. This is a very, very selective application of Occam's razor, an extremely selective and wrongful application of Occam's razor. If we want to apply Occam's razor everywhere consistently, why in the world would we ignore all of the early accounts of Jesus's death and resurrection? Why would we ignore his apostles saying or reporting that he said he would be killed, that he was indeed killed, that he was crucified, that he died for everyone's sins, and so on? Why would the apostles go around the world preaching this and be tortured on that path and be killed, beheaded, crucified, and so on? Instead of, why would we discard that and go for the least likely explanation, which nobody ever reported? Why would we ignore independent accounts? Why would we ignore the scientific evidence? Why would we ignore non-Christian accounts of Jesus' crucifixion, and so on? Why would we go on and accept the least likely explanation? And finally, why are we applying Occam's razor here to a situation where we expect something so unusual and so extreme and so miraculous to happen? Between whether he survived or whether he died and was crucified, both of these things seem extraordinary given the circumstances. I don't think that this is a situation where you can actually sit down and apply Occam's razor and say, well, he clearly survived, because otherwise, the other option is less likely. The idea that Jesus was crucified but didn't die because Jesus could not die is not an idea that is popular. It is an idea that came from different sources over the centuries, from heretical sources as they were known, from Gnostic sources, from Basilides as reported by early Christians, from Docetic sources, and so on. The idea there was that Jesus wasn't a mere human; he could be killed and die. He was crucified, or he only appeared to have been crucified, but he was never killed because he is not flesh. He is beyond flesh. This is a very Gnostic idea. These were views that were considered heretical and Gnostic. Islam adopted this whole narrative without understanding what it adopts, because these narratives developed due to the idea that Jesus is not just a regular human or prophet, that he is divine, that he is above human nature. Why would Muslims adopt this whole idea? If we are supposed to say that Jesus was crucified, he didn't die, and so on, are we also to disregard all the other things about Jesus, such as that even according to the Quran, Jesus was born of a virgin, born of a virgin in the time of Jesus and the environment, in the Hellenic environment and others, was understood to be a very clear indication that he is not of human origin, that he is indeed the offspring of the divine, so that he is the son of God. If we are to adopt Christian ideas and the Christian narratives, then we shouldn't be sloppy and adopt only some of them and disregard the others. We should take all of it or leave all of it. Either you take the entire New Testament narrative about Jesus, or you drop it and reject it altogether. Furthermore, we also show that there are serious problems with the majority Muslim view, the substitution theory. That substitution theory, as David mentioned, depicts Allah as a cosmic trickster who starts false religions for no reason. Also, it depicts Jesus as a total failure. There was the one idea presented that Jesus clearly said that he came only to the lost sheep of Israel. That's a very interesting thing to point out. He said, I came only to the lost sheep of Israel. He didn't say, I came to the lost tribes of Israel. He said, lost sheep of Israel. Within context, he's clearly contrasting Israelis against non-Israelis. If he did indeed say, I came only for the lost tribes of Israel, or he meant that he only came for the lost tribes of Israel, why did he spend his whole time preaching to the Judean Israelites? That doesn't make any sense. Third, Allah says in the Quran that he aided the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost. The Christians who became uppermost are the ones who proclaimed Jesus' death and resurrection. So according to the Quran, they are the true followers of Jesus. Paul, the apostle, wrote his records very, very, very early on. And the idea there is quite clear. It is the Christian idea and the Christian beliefs. Fourth, the Quran affirms the inspiration, preservation, and the authority of the Christian scriptures. These scriptures claim that Jesus died by crucifixion. Is this where you take over, David?
Dave, I think your mic. I think you muted Mike. Your mic's muted, David. Or is it?
No, it's not.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. You're good.
All right, you guys hear me this time?
Yep.
All right, so yeah, it sounded like Tahir was claiming that it sounded like, maybe a misunderstanding, it sounded like he was saying that a miraculous explanation can't have any evidence for it, or that a naturalistic explanation is always the best explanation. I hope I'm misunderstanding him, because these guys are arguing. If so, then he's arguing like an atheist. That would be very odd. As far as evidence for someone rising from the dead, if you know that someone is really dead, you have good evidence that someone is really dead, and you have good evidence that he's alive again later. I would say you have evidence that he rose from the dead. Very strange argument, since both the Bible and the Quran talk about Jesus raising people from the dead. Tahir seems to think that this is absolute nonsense, or that there can't be any evidence for it. Tahir asks if someone was assassinated and appeared later. He says the obvious interpretation would be that he survived. Yeah, you could say that. If you weren't clear on whether he was dead and you saw someone later, you might conclude that he survived. But this actually goes against you, because if the disciples were not completely convinced that he had been resurrected, they would have, as Tahir is pointing out, they would have concluded that he simply survived. In other words, if he showed up and he's all mangled up and he's hobbling around, and this is what they saw, which is what they would have seen if he simply survived crucifixion, they would have said, oh, wow, praise God, he survived the crucifixion. They wouldn't have said he'd been resurrected. Resurrected was a glorified state where you don't decompose anymore. So why would they conclude that? Something big happened, and it definitely wasn't him simply barely surviving crucifixion. Umar quoted Deuteronomy, that God's curse is on anyone hanged on a tree. I don't know how to break it to our Ahmadi friends, but they believe that Jesus was hanged on a tree, and therefore they would believe that Jesus is under God's curse, following their interpretation here. I have to point out, for everyone who's a little confused here, the Apostle Paul brings this up. He says, for all who rely on the works, this is in Galatians, says, for all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, cursed be everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them. Now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law. The righteous shall live by faith. But the law is not of faith. Rather, the one who does them shall live by them. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree, so that Christ Jesus, the blessing of Abraham, might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. So Ahmadis and Christians both believe that Jesus was hanged on a tree, but there's a purpose to it in Christianity. There's no purpose to it for our Ahmadi friends, so they just believe that Jesus was cursed, and that's all. They quote they give the sign of Jonah. This is absolutely amazing. When AP brought up that Jesus called Peter Satan for claiming that Jesus wouldn't die, that is that he quoted Mark, but it's in the exact same chapter where we have the sign of Jonah. It's in Matthew 16. Matthew 16, Jesus brings up the sign of Jonah. Then Peter says in the same chapter, you're never going to die. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. So think about this. You can interpret the sign of Jonah in multiple ways, because Jesus doesn't explain it in detail. So there are multiple interpretations. There's one interpretation that Jesus specifically calls satanic. It's demonic. It's straight from the pits of hell. And that's the interpretation, that he won't die. And that's the interpretation that Muslims go with. They say, hey, there's interpretation A, B, C, and D. D is the one Jesus says is satanic. That's the one he clearly meant. And I'll just have to say, there's some more points which we'll get to in our rebuttals, but this is the definition of cherry picking. What are our Muslim friends quoting? They're quoting books that repeatedly say over and over again that Jesus said he would die. Books that say over and over again that Jesus died. They're even quoting Matthew, where the angel here says, yes, Jesus rose from the dead. And they're quoting all this and finding evidence that Jesus didn't die. Shocker.
All right. Thank you so much for that rebuttal. All right, Dr. Tahir and Umar, you guys are up next for your 10-minute rebuttal, and I will start your time as soon as you begin to speak.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to this, because really, they've just made a massive blunder, as usual. As usual. I don't know how they managed to do every single debate we have, but let's go through it. So, firstly, they said that, is this the Ahmadiyya position? No, it's the Quranic position. As I've shown, the Quranic position is that Jesus, in actual fact, survived the crucifixion, and that the substitution theory is not correct because it describes Jesus as being the one as who appeared to them. Shubbi halahum, third person, masculine, singular. As for the crucifixion itself, apostate prophet began by talking about how Muslims can't agree with on what happened. Ahmadis, Ismailis, Sunni, Shia. Now, the fact of the matter is that I've made it clear what the Quranic position is. What other Muslims choose to believe in is up to them. But this is coming from a person who's defending Christian theology, in which people couldn't even agree on what the Trinity is, and they can't even agree on what the Trinity is 2,000 years later, which is the nature and substance of God. Does that make the Trinity false? Then he talked about the fact that there were multiple different points to be made from making a sense from the Bible. He began with Jesus predicting the crucifixion itself, and they've just reiterated that multiple times, that Peter held the so-called satanic view in Mark 3, Mark 9, 3, 30 to 32. The reality is that Jesus also prophesied and told in John 10, in the Good Shepherd, and also in Matthew 13, 24 to 30, which is the wheat and the weeds, that his teachings would in actual fact be interpolated. And I'll read out to you specifically what he actually says. He talks about in John 10, he says, "He who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out." He goes on to talk about how the fact that he is the good shepherd, etc., and that he is referring to the Pharisees in particular here, because it begins, "Verily, truly, I tell you, Pharisees," right? Matthew 13 in 24. He then told them another parable, which is of the sower of the good seed in the field, and talked about how the devil would sow weeds into the wheat. And this is exactly what happened. You had Paul's teachings, which sowed the weeds of current Christian teachings into Jesus' teachings, and they grew together. And in Asia in particular, Jesus' followers became numerous, his honest, true followers who did not believe that he died, and they eventually became Muslim. But among the Gentiles to whom Paul preached, you had them becoming this kind of pagan religion of worshipping Jesus instead of God. So this idea that we're cherry picking, the reality is that Jesus himself tells us that his teaching would be interpolated in multiple parables. So at the end of the day, you have to make a decision. What do you take as your minimally accepted facts? What we try to do is not rely on he said this, which is very easy to interpolate into the Bible, but to rely rather on his actions. Actions are always more dependable than a person's words. Words can be interpolated into a text, but on the contrary, actions speak for themselves. We showed the actions that he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane not to die. We showed the actions that he was on the cross and crying out, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." We showed in actual fact the actions of the blood and water coming out under pressure. So this idea that it's just we're cherry picking, no, we're not cherry picking. We're basing our argument on the minimally accepted facts. Then you have the fact that the argument they make, which is very funny in my view, that the companions of Jesus, the disciples of Jesus, believed that Jesus had died, and therefore we should take their testimony as primary. Well, they didn't. Okay, so in Acts 21, for example, you have Paul going back to James, and this is a point apostate prophet made. He said that crucifixion is related to atonement. He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. So when we demonstrate, therefore, that atonement was not the belief of the early Christians, we can also demonstrate that they did not believe that Jesus died an accursed death for the sins of mankind. And we know this because in Acts 21, Paul goes back to St. James, and James tells him that the Jews who are from Asia who have believed in Jesus have heard that he has come and that he preaches against all men everywhere, to all men everywhere, against the customs of Moses, against the traditions of their fathers, and against the law of Moses. And he warns Paul that if you don't undertake the Nazirite purification rituals and publicly repent of modern day Christian doctrines, then you will in actual fact be mobbed by these people and they will seek to put you to death. Guess what he does? Does he turn around and say, "Oh, James, I know the real gospel," right? He doesn't do that at all. He publicly repents with the 3 men who were given to him, or the 2 men who were given to him who were similar to him, and he repents of modern day Christian doctrines. He repents of atonement. He repents of crucifixion by death. And even then he's mobbed in the temple by the Jews who have believed in Jesus. I don't know how much time I've got, 5 minutes. I'm going to wrap it up and give it to Umar in a minute. But then you also have the question of, well, where did this concept of resurrection come from? Now, you'd be perhaps not surprised to learn that actually Paul claimed to have it revealed to him by God. You're pretending like the early Christians all believed that Jesus died and came back to life. Absolutely not true. If it was the case, then how could Paul have possibly claimed that Jesus' resurrection was revealed to him? He says, 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8, for what I received I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and to the 12. He goes on to say in Galatians 1, 11-12, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by the revelation from Jesus Christ. So this idea that apostate prophet and David Wood are attempting to make, which is that, oh, everybody believed in the resurrection of Christ among the early. No, they didn't. In fact, when it was presented to them, they asked him to publicly repent. And when he publicly repented, even then the Jews from Asia who had believed in Jesus, they mobbed him in the temple. And Paul himself takes on the claim that the resurrection to himself and ascribes it to himself. He says, I did not receive it from any man. That means none of the other Christians, none of the other followers of Jesus, the Ebionites, not Christians, for Christian is a term invented by Paul, none of them believed in it. Then I'm going to, very briefly, I've covered that. And Umar, I just want to mention one quick thing about the Injil. He said about the Injil that the Quran asks Muslims to judge by the gospel. The Quran does not claim ask Christians to judge by the gospel in all matters. This is absolutely false. If you look at the actual verses of the Quran, chapter 5, verse 48, you will realize that the very next verse is about judging the truth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This is because the prophecies in the gospel are retained, because the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were in the form of parables, which are stories, and therefore not interpolatable, because you would have to change the entire structure of the story. And so when the Quran asks the Christian to judge by the Injil, it does not refer to judging by the Injil in terms of its teachings. It refers to the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. Omar, I'd like to hand it over to you if you have anything to say. Sorry for the lack of time.
No. My brother is, just to reiterate, my brother has therefore shown that in Acts 21, the Jesus Jews, the Messianic Jews, did not believe modern-day Christian doctrine. Paul claimed that it was revealed to him, and at the end of his life, he repented of all of them and then died. Okay. Now, this isn't just in Acts 21, although for Christians, this should be sufficient. This is also, has been discussed by many historians that the beliefs of the Messianic Jews in the first century was actually quite different to modern day Christians. I'll quote one, Paul B. Johnson in History of Christianity. Paul's church had not been anchored to the historical Jesus of the Jerusalem church. He says, when he's talking about the Ebionites, it is interesting that their writings and those of other Jewish Christians in the 50s who had first introduced the idea of heresy portray Paul as Antichrist and the first heretic. He went on to say the Christology of Paul, which later became the substance of the Christian universal faith, came from the diaspora and was preached by an outsider who many in the Jerusalem church did not recognize as an apostle at all. So what we have actually is two narratives and two religions in one in Christianity or in the Bible. We have the moral majesty of Jesus, which is what Christianity markets itself upon, tied with Paul's doctrines of atonement and resurrection, which he claimed was revealed to him and therefore was not followed by the actual disciples. And they are put together, and it is sold on the moral majesty of Jesus, which we all commend, but actually through the back door, you end up believing that Jesus died and, died for your sins and all these other doctrines about Trinity. So it's two in one. And the Quran saves Jesus from this. It saves him from this fate of being worshipped, and it restores to him the honor of being the Messiah of the Jews, which is indeed a great honor. Now, just to briefly touch upon this in a different way, the idea that the disciples all thought that Jesus was going to be killed, according to what we propose are clear interpolations of the gospel, that Jesus told them a few times that he's going to be killed, can be clearly refuted by their behavior. Why would they all disperse at the time of the when he was put up on the cross? Why did Peter repent of knowing him, pretend he didn't know him? If this was the plan all along, why were they so shocked when he came and was alive again? This was all the plan. Clearly, this wasn't the plan. They didn't know what was going to happen. Jesus showed that he had God's favor on his side, and that's why he survived. And that was the sign of his truth. Briefly then, David said, Deuteronomy 21, he was hanged Deuteronomy 21 specifically says punishment by death, thus it is about crucifixion to death. So his allegation there against me is incorrect.
All right, thank you guys. All right, David and AP, you guys are back in the seat for your second round of rebuttals. Once again, 10 minutes, and I'll start your time as soon as you begin to speak.
I want to make it very quick and just mention a few things here, which are that so we so far demonstrated that Jesus repeatedly said that he would be killed, very explicitly once again, and he called the Islamic view satanic. I also showed that we have numerous ancient sources reporting Jesus' death, that we have Roman crucifixion practices that make it very difficult for anyone to survive, and that there is scholarly consensus that he died by crucifixion. Now, a few things here. Our dear friends argued that it is actually the Quranic position and not the Ahmadi position that Jesus was crucified but didn't die. This is not true. Open it for yourself. Quran chapter 4, verse 157. In fact, look up Quran chapter 4, verse 157. There's a very interesting tool that you can use nowadays to get the direct interlinear Quran with its meanings and so on. And you can clearly see there for yourself, if you don't want to believe me, that what the Quran says there is that they said, indeed, we killed the Messiah, Isa, son of Maryam, the messenger of Allah, but they did not kill him and they did not crucify him, but it was made to appear to them so. So it doesn't say they crucified him, but they did not kill him. It clearly and explicitly says they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. This is the Quranic position.
AP,
reading
AP and Tahir's translation says appeared to them like one crucified. It was in italics because it's not in the Arabic and it's added. So he's sitting there saying, look how clear the Quran is. It clearly affirms our position. It has added words that aren't in the Arabic, because if you just leave the Arabic, it doesn't give the Ahmadi view at all.
Yeah, the Arabic clearly says "Wama thalabuhu." It says they did not crucify him. So that is the Quranic position, which is why the vast majority of Muslims throughout history have always understood it as so, and there has not been any serious credible mainstream idea that he was crucified and he somehow survived or anything like that.
And by the way, Tahir said he gave his response. He said, well, there are disagreements about the Trinity. Does that mean that the Trinity is true? We're not saying that Muslims have disagreements, therefore there is no correct Muslim position. We're saying the overwhelming vast majority of Muslims for 14 centuries all interpreted it at face value and said this is denying the crucifixion. It's not until you have to wait 13 centuries to find a serious movement that's claiming that Jesus survived the crucifixion. So if you wanted an actual parallel, imagine 13 centuries of Christian, no one concludes the doctrine of the Trinity, and all of a sudden some guy comes out of India and defends the doctrine of the Trinity, and you say, oh, that's the Trinity, that's the true doctrine. That would be more of a parallel. Imagine no one concluded it based on the text, and you only conclude it after some guy tells you how to interpret it. And then because of your allegiance to this guy, you have to kind of read it into the text. That would be a parallel, but fortunately, we're not dealing with that situation.
Yeah, I want to quickly correct here. It says "Wama qataluhu wama salabuhu," so that is they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. Our opponents give the idea that Paul himself presented the idea that Jesus died and then so he was crucified, he died, and he was resurrected. That prior to him, people didn't believe this, that this was completely unheard of, and so on. This is completely false. Their reference here in this case would be to the idea that Paul presents of how and why Jesus died and why he was dead and why he was crucified, and rather the issue of atonement and what purpose this serves, and so on. You have it very, very clearly in Matthew 28. That so you have first explicit descriptions in every single gospel that he says he will be killed, of him getting killed, of them watching him take his last breaths, them confirming that he is actually dead, and 3 days later, Matthew 28, like many other examples of his followers being informed, do not be afraid. I know that you have come looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. So they buried him, and he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. This is the actual text in the Gospels. So this is why, once again, I want to reiterate: you either take what the Christian sources say as a whole, or you reject them fully. You can't just cherry pick like this.
All right, I'll add some points. Tahir and Umar said that Jesus' legs weren't broken, therefore no death blow was given. That's nonsense. The death blow was the spear in the side. They didn't break the legs because the breaking of the legs was meant to hasten death. If you're hanging in that position, it's hard to breathe, and so you break the legs and you can no longer push up to breathe. That's how you would kill somebody. Jesus was already dead, and the Romans were pretty darn good at spotting when someone was dead. Tahir says that people survived crucifixion. We have a record of one person surviving crucifixion out of 3 they tried to save them. They took the crucifixion process wasn't finished. They didn't wait until these guys were already dead and then try to take them down. They tried to save these guys and tried to save 3 crucified men, and only 1 survived anyway. I don't know how you're concluding that that's somehow relevant to Jesus surviving when he went through the entire crucifixion process. Says they wrapped Jesus in healing spices. They weren't healing spices. Jews would return to a tomb and they would put spices in there to deal with the smell. So they said they thought Jesus was a ghost. Yeah, that's what you would think if someone appeared to you. Like if I saw my great grandmother right now, I'd probably think that she is a ghost. But you're right. That's what someone would conclude. Why did they conclude that he had been resurrected? Because he proved it to them. Something would have to be very big. Our friends say that Hindu scriptures from the 1st century say Jesus was in India. Bull. That's actually supposedly a 5,000-year-old source. So it's 3,000 years before Jesus, where he's supposedly getting prophecies of the future. Our earliest copy of this that includes the passage about Jesus is from the 18th century, where Hindus were dealing with Christian missionaries. Our earliest copy is from the 18th century, and they're expecting us to take it seriously as a 5,000-year-old Hindu work where they're looking forward to Jesus appearing. My goodness, this is desperation. Tahir says that Christians...
You're absolutely right, David. This is an idea of in polytheistic religions like Hinduism, for example. It's a common thing to syncretize from different religious beliefs and adopt them into your religious history and so on. Our Ahmadi friends presented it as if there was a first century text, first century instance mentioning some person corresponding to Isa, Masih, or Jesus in India. Never happened. There is no single piece of evidence that there is such a first century text. The earliest occurrences of something that is similar to this appear after the time of Islam, actually. And the first instances of this being clearly mentioned are, as David said, within the last 2 centuries. And I also briefly want to say, by the way, the sign of Jonah was mentioned. The sign of Jonah is a very interesting topic. I like reading Jewish sources, as some people may know, and it is actually a common Kabbalistic, so Jewish mysticistic belief that Jonah in the Bible, when he was thrown into the sea, he literally died. He literally died. He literally gave up his soul, and his soul went up
because
to the
that's
throne
what he says.
of God. And his soul stayed there for the entirety of the days. And then when his trial was over, his soul came back and he was resurrected. So he directly experienced death. This would make sense comparing it to Jesus' death and resurrection.
Yeah, and that's what Jonah says. Jonah says he was in Sheol, and God raised him up from the pit. The pit. That's the pit. That's the abode of the dead. Tahir says that they rely on Jesus' actions, not on his words. So not on his words when he keeps saying over and over again that he's going up to Jerusalem to be killed. They said one of the silliest, borderline insane arguments I've ever seen is that in Acts 21, Paul publicly repents of his view of atonement. What did they say? What did James say? He said, hey, people here are spreading the rumor that you're going around telling Jews to turn away from the law and that Jews don't have to. That's not what Paul said. That's what Paul told the Gentiles. The Gentiles don't need the law. So he corrects them by showing that. And that's exactly what Paul says. He says, when I'm around the Jews, I behave as a Jew. When I'm around Gentiles, I behave as the Gentiles. So he's simply correcting them. They quote 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8, and they quote this as a revelation of Paul. That's absolute nonsense. And they supported this with Galatians, where Paul says that he got his gospel through revelation. My goodness, keep reading. At the very end of the same chapter, Paul says, then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and remained with him 15 days. The next part, then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately, before those who seemed influential, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had run in vain. What does he do? He verifies the gospel that he got by revelation. It's the apostles who gave him that passage in 1 Corinthians 15, affirming Jesus' death and resurrection. Guys, again, definition of cherry picking, taking something and ignoring what comes right after it.
All right. Thank you guys for that second rebuttal. All right. Dr. Tahir and Dr. Umar, you guys are back in the seat for your second rebuttal. And once again, I'll start your 10-minute timer when you begin to speak.
Well, hey, again, we're back with a whole new lot of, I don't know what to call it, maybe trash. I don't want to be mean, but I mean, it's really bad this time. This time they've tried to venture into Arabic, Quranic Arabic of all kinds of Arabic, to show how ignorant they are. Unfortunately, I'm really sorry to say this, but it's just plain fact. So, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. Okay, they did not slay him. قَتَلَ means to kill with a sword or with a spear. وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ. Now, I'd like to share my screen if that's okay. Actually, Marlon, can I do that?
Yes, you can. Go for it.
Okay. So the question really is what does salib mean? What does salabuhu mean? Okay, so here we have crucifixion is used 3 times in the Quran as a word, and this is an instance from Joseph in the prison, and he says, "O my 2 companions, as for one of you, he was given the interpretation of the dreams that are given to him. O my 2 companions of the prison, as for one of you, he will pour out wine for his Lord to drink, and as for the other, he will be crucified so that the birds will eat from off his head." It says, I'll show you, it says here, فَيُصْلَبُ فَتَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْ رَأْسِهِ. So what he's saying here is that he will be crucified so that the birds will eat from off his head. Now, it doesn't say here that he'll die, but it's self-evident in the word salib. Here is فَيُصْلَبُ, with same word, just different form, is that he will die in the act of crucifixion, because birds don't eat from a body that is obviously still alive. They will eat from a body that is dead. So the word salabu actually has within it the meaning of to die, not always. It can also mean to be put on the cross as well. But the question here, which of the 2 is it? Now, it's quite clear in this particular statement of the Quran, it's referring to the allegation that Jesus died on the cross. So when it then comes and says he did not die through being cut, because that was one of the 2 interpretations as to how he died, through a cut, through the spear thrust, which was what was mentioned by David Wood. And then the second method that was traditionally thought that by which he died was that he died through, I think I've stopped sharing, haven't I? Good. The second time, have I stopped sharing, Marlon?
Yeah, you're good. You got your camera back up. Yep.
Sorry, great. So there were 2 methods of death which were presented traditionally as to how Jesus died. One was through this cut of the spear, and the second was through the act of crucifixion. And so the Quran refers to both these forms of death in the words of مَا قَتَلُوا مَا صَلَبُوهُ. The word وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, he's making out like I'm hiding some translation. It literally means وَمَا قَتَلُوا مَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. Rather he or it was made to appear to them as so. That's all it means. Okay? And that clearly means, therefore, that Jesus must have been on the cross for it to say that he appeared to them as so. Because if he's not present, how can he appear as anything? Okay? As for the early Muslims, the fact of the matter is that it hasn't taken 1,200 years for Muslims to realize that actually that Jesus was on the cross and that he survived the crucifixion and died. The early, later on in his normal life, The early Muslims, many of them believed in actual fact that Jesus had lived a normal life and died. So the earliest consensus of all the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was that Muhammad, peace be upon him, had died as the previous prophets to him had also died. And they did this upon the verse of the Quran, وَمَا مُحَمَّدًا إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. Muhammad is only a messenger. Verily the messengers before him passed away. The other point I want to make is the question of the... Oh, yes, I do have some other quotes actually as well to mention. Imam Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari, the most authentic book of the Quran, after the Quran, states very clearly that one of the most prominent companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stated that Jesus had died, Mutuwafika Mumituka, and there are many other examples that we can present on our website. We have presented in a lot of our websites. As for cherry picking, I want to come back to this issue. I wanted to highlight again that this question of cherry picking is a total smokescreen. In reality, it is they who are cherry picking because they're relying on a few quotes which were interpolated into the Bible by Paul, who claimed that the resurrection of Jesus was revealed to him and by his early followers, and instead they leave out the coherent narrative of Jesus's actions. And that's actually what makes a narrative. It's what he actually did. Actions cannot be interpolated, words can. And so they are the ones who are cherry picking because they're the ones who leave out, in actual fact, the real belief and the real understanding of Jonah's survival. They're adopting a very minority position within Jewish literature that Jonah died and came back to life. Everybody knows that in Jonah 2, verse 1, it states very clearly, then Jonah prayed in the belly of the whale to God. Okay? And Jesus himself said that I will be in the heart of the earth as Jonah was in the belly of the whale. For as Jonah was 3 days and nights in the belly of the whale, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth. So the fact of the matter is that Jonah went into the belly of the whale alive, and he came out alive, which means Jesus must have gone into the heart of the earth alive and come out alive. And again, it doesn't matter what a minority of position or minority view is on whether Jonah died or not. The question is, when he was communicating the sign of Jonah to his followers, what did they understand by the sign of Jonah? We know that the majority opinion throughout Jewish history has been that Jonah actually survived because he prayed in the belly of the whale. How could he be praying in the belly of the whale if he was dead? Then finally, there's a question that they keep hiding the issue of the blood and water gushing out. I want to come back to this issue because in actual fact, if you cut somebody with a spear and you cut them to kill them, as David Wood said, he was killed by the spear thrust, thus justifying why the Quran says, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ, they did not kill him through a cut, right? They did not stab him or kill him in that manner. He doesn't highlight the fact that they just before they cut him, they said that they saw that he was already dead. Why would you go and try and kill somebody who you think is already dead? It says in the Bible that they thought that he was dead and therefore that they cut him. They cut him to check if he was dead. That's why they cut him on the side. They didn't pierce him through directly. And they cut him on the side. It was a pain test. It was a primitive form of assessing whether the person in actual fact was still conscious. And by cutting him on the side, if he didn't elicit a reaction, then they confirmed the death that they already thought was present. Otherwise, it would make no sense. They think he's dead, and then they cut him on the side to deliver a killing blow, which isn't even a killing blow. It doesn't make any sense. It lacks all coherence. And they're leaving out the key thing here. Euthes in the Bible, in Greek, it means to come out straight. You need blood pumping under pressure. And this is the key moment. This is the key question. At this moment, was Jesus dead? We have one incident which shows that his heart is actively beating. They don't want to address it because it's very clear that a heart which is beating is alive, right? So the incident of the crucifixion demonstrates that whatever you may think, however you want to interpret it, whatever statements and interpolated statements you want to rely on, the facts speak for themselves, which is that at the moment of supposed death, he had a beating heart. Omar, please.
Is that over to me now?
Yeah.
I mean, and you mentioned about this primitive pain test. I mean, doctors, we're both doctors. Doctors do get it wrong even today, even with modern methods of verifying deaths. There are multiple cases of people who've been certified dead.
Omar, these were Roman soldiers. Wow.
Yeah, this idea that Roman centurions were somehow, trained medical professionals.
Roman soldier in the dark with the earthquakes happening and the sun having eclipse. He's got an amazing ability to tell whether somebody's dead 4 meters away.
Yeah, and certainly a lot better than, of course, doctors who do this day in, day out and still can get it wrong sometimes. There's multiple cases in the modern world of people who appear to be dead but aren't dead. And actually, I find it slightly disturbing David's argument here. This idea that, the Romans, they knew how to kill people, they could crucify people. Do you believe in God? Do you not believe that God could actually save him, and that God arranged things in a certain way in order to save him? Is that not possible? Is that not within the power of God? I mean, it certainly is. And when you actually look at the facts, when you see that he was only on the cross for 6 to maximum 9 hours, his legs weren't broken, he has a beating heart just before he's taken down, this is clear indication that there was a plan by God to save him. So actually, this idea that this is some kind of inevitable argument of death is completely false. I didn't have much more to say. Brother Daher, did you have anything? You covered all my points that I got.
I love what you just said, which is that it was God's plan to save him, because that's what the Quran says. The Quran clearly summarizes it all. وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. So small. وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ. It's the passive voice. It or he was made to appear to them as so. In other words, as one dead.
Yeah.
In other words, that God arranged it because the passive voice indicates that God took measures to make sure that he appeared to be dead.
And here's the irony. Can I say? Here's the irony, is that actually the Quranic narrative is what rescues the Bible. Because it is true that Jesus apparently says that I'm going to be killed. Even though this doesn't make sense with any of the subsequent events, if you were simply to accept everything in the Gospels, it becomes incoherent. If you were to take our methodology, you can still have Jesus as a true man, as a holy man, while accepting, that there is coherence in religious belief. Otherwise, just reject it all.
All right. Thank you guys for that. And we are going to jump into our crossfire round. Once again, thank you guys for the openings and the 2 rounds of rebuttals. And so now with the crossfire round, it'll be a total of 32 minutes. Both teams will get 4 minutes each, back and forth, to respond to the opponent's objections or concerns. And so in this crossfire round, we want to make sure that we only engage the questions and the arguments that are at hand. This is not a direct cross-examination where you guys are throwing questions at each other in that regard. So all I ask is that you guys continue to keep the same decorum and respect for each other, so we can all engage and have a great time in this discussion. All right. With that said, David, and go ahead, AP. Look like you want to say something.
I want to quickly share my screen here to point something out as well.
Absolutely.
So, unfortunately, I've debated people. I debated Nader Ahmed. Even that was better than this. This is just pure barbarism in the name of.
Hey, AP. Hold on 1 second. Yes. Before you start that, let me get the timer and everything situated.
Okay.
And then you guys give me a couple seconds here, then we'll get you going, man.
Okay.
Sorry, Marlon. Remind me of the timings here. Is it 5?
It'd be 4 minutes each.
We're going 4 back and forth.
Yeah, four back and forth for a total of 32 minutes. So, all right, AP, you got it for 4 minutes, man.
Okay, is it on the screen now? My screen sharing, I only see it as a small.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring it up, the bigger one. Okay. You can go ahead.
Okay, so obviously a lot of really, really bad stuff was said here, but I also want to share my screen here and show just one aspect here. We talked about Quran chapter 4 verse 157, and I briefly explained how the Quran clearly says that he was neither killed nor crucified, and we have then argued about something. Now I want to ask one simple question after I demonstrate what the Quran actually says. It says here, you can look at the Arabic, وَمَا قَتُلُهُ, they did not kill him, وَمَا صَلَبُهُ, they did not crucify him. And then it was only made to appear so. It was only made to appear so does not mean that he was actually brought on the cross and it was only made to appear as if he died. Nobody understood this as so. This is an idea that Gnostics also believed, and they thought that somebody was actually crucified, but it wasn't Jesus. There are lots of interpretations you can make of this. However, I just want to point out something very funny and very silly here. So I pointed out that it says they did not kill him, and they did not crucify him. Our Ahmadi friend says that crucifying here, when it says they did not crucify him, means they did not kill him by crucifixion. Okay. Then why in the world does it say they did not kill him and they did not crucify him? This means that Allah is saying they did not kill him, nor did they kill him by crucifixion. Why would that? Why is that what Allah would be saying? It seems like Allah has a very, very strange way of communicating, which is why it clearly says they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, which is how it was understood throughout the Islamic history and Islamic scholarship. Secondly, accusing us of cherry picking things. Seriously, once again, Matthew 28, very, very clearly, even the Greek says he came back from the dead, from nekros. In Greek, it's very clear there. He died and he came back. He rose.
And that's actually connected to the sign of Jonah. So again, once again, sign of Jonah, you read about Jesus saying it in Matthew 16, same exact chapter right after that. Jesus says that he's going up to Jerusalem, he's going to be killed. Peter says this will never happen to you. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. He rebukes Peter and calls him Satan specifically for saying that he wouldn't die. So that is the one interpretation that's completely ruled out, and it's the interpretation that our Muslim friends cling to. They say, but Jonah was alive. Not according to Jonah himself. What does Jonah say? He says, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. Sheol, what is that? That's the abode of the dead. Later, as far as how he was alive again, verse 5, he says, the waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head at the roots of the mountains. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. And so they'll interpret Jonah as saying, yep, I was alive the entire time, even though he says he was in Sheol and that God raised him up from the pit that had closed upon him forever. And Jesus, who says that their interpretation, the Ahmadi and Muslim interpretation, is completely satanic. They say, nope, that's what Jesus is actually saying. He's saying that our interpretation is as good as gold. My goodness.
All right.
Yeah,
that was four, right, Marlon? Were we
about 8 seconds left?
I also want to point out one thing, which is that the Hindu text was brought up. There is still no single evidence to give us that there was actually a first century record of this.
Yeah, I want to see the first century manuscript.
All right,
Dr.
Tahir. Dr. Tahir and Umar, you guys are up for your 4 minutes.
Can I just jump in? I find it remarkable that David is quoting Jonah, but he for some reason stops before verse 7, which says, as my life was ebbing away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who worship vain idols forsake their true loyalty. And he goes on, say, deliverance belongs to the Lord. So it's about as he is heading towards death, as my life was ebbing away, I remembered the Lord who heard my prayer and brought me out. So yes, it's about when someone is dying or in the process of heading towards death, they are saved. That is the sign of Jonah. The idea that this is some kind of fringe interpretation is quite frankly clearly false. Relying on some incredibly minority position, which contradicts most significantly the words of Jonah itself, the book of Jonah. I think it should not be accepted in this situation. And I would like to emphasize and repeat again, if it was the case that Jesus did really to go around telling all of his disciples that I'm going to be killed and then I'm going to come back, why would they all flee? Why were they all shocked to see him again? That doesn't make sense. Why was he praying in the Garden of Gethsemane before? Why did he cry out, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Why did these things happen? There is no explanation. We have presented a coherent narrative that makes sense of the bulk and the majority of the actual events, pre-crucifixion, peri-crucifixion, and post-crucifixion. You've done nothing to actually refute that except to rely on certain statements which are imputed to Jesus in the Bible, in the Gospels, which contradict other statements. So this is what we're saying. We're saying go and look at the actual overall narrative. Because if you don't do that, then you have to simply say this is some incoherent religious mumbo jumbo. Let's just ignore all of it. We don't want to do that. And we're giving the audience a methodology in order to save them from that fate, and to be able to understand Jesus as a true man. You have not been able to give any such methodology. All you're saying is that according to your methodology, the Gospels are basically incoherent. Nothing really makes sense. Then why believe? Well, perhaps it's the foolishness of man.
Yeah, which is the wisdom of God according to Paul, right? So absolutely right, Omar. So the case of Jonah was what we call a near-death experience, and it's called near death. It's not called actual death. A lot of near-death experiences happen today. People see the tunnel, see the light, get the life review, and come back. It doesn't mean they actually died. This is a well-known phenomenon. You can go on NDE.org, I think it is, got thousands of such near-death experiences, and you can read them for yourself. They're all living, by the way. They didn't all die and come back to life. As for the meaning of Salib, it's very sad that this individual, he doesn't seem to listen to what I'm actually saying. There were two theories of how Jesus died. And in fact, David Wood has already mentioned one of the theories, which is that he was stabbed with a spear. This is refuted in the words وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ, because qital means to be killed through a spear in particular, or through a sword, or through a sharp object, to be killed directly. Crucifixion, salabu, is in actual fact is the word, as I demonstrated from the other verse of the Quran relating to the interpretation of Joseph, is used to mean death. In and of itself, it means to die through the act of crucifixion. It's like if we say that such and such drowned. I don't need to say that such and such died through drowning. The word died is implicit in the term drowning. But in the same way, crucifixion can in Arabic also mean to be put on the cross, just as we use it in English. Or we can say he was crucified. It can mean he died through crucifixion. It can also mean he was put on the cross. We argue that in actual fact it means here that he was died through crucifixion. The reason we do so is because the Quran is refuting the allegation that he died. The Quran is not refuting the allegation that he was put on the cross. It says, we did kill the Messiah, son of Mary, messenger of Allah, but they did not slay him with a spear, nor did they kill him through crucifixion. It's refuting both aspects by which Jesus was thought to, in actual fact, have died. I want to put it to you, how do you explain the fact that he had a beating heart at the time of the supposed death?
All right, David Napi.
I just want to ask very quickly how silly it would be to say that somebody was actually electrocuted but didn't die, and we then said he was neither killed nor was he electrocuted. It's kind of funny. However, I also want to point out one thing, which is I want to bring up once again Matthew 28. Matthew 28 very, very clearly says that very clearly has people under the impression that Jesus actually died. He was actually killed, and he is being looked for, but he is no longer there because he has risen from the dead. This is not just an interpretation. It's not just the English translation. It's not something that we're making up. It is directly in the text. It is found in the Greek. He was dead. He rose from the dead and is going ahead of you into the Galilee. That is what it says. We have multiple accounts of the Gospels clearly laying out and clearly saying that he died and came back to life. Why did Jesus pray and ask for help? Why did Jesus pray that this cup is passed from him? Very, very simple. This is not something that is a great mystery that Christians have never answered. It's because of the nature of Jesus, which has been part of Christology from day one. I know this. Anyone who has read 5 minutes of Christology knows this. The explanations there are that it is Jesus's human experience with his human nature, his fully human and fully divine nature, or his fully human and divine nature, and so on. This is not a mystery. It has been around for 2,000 years. Go ahead, David.
On the sign of Jonah, they say that in verse 7 he said, "When my life was fading away, I remembered the Lord." Yeah. Jonah runs. He ends up in the water. And when his life was fading away, he remembered the Lord. Right, that's true. But what does he say in verse 6? He says he died. So he remembers the Lord as he's dying. He says he was dead. Guys, you're at least acknowledging that there is an alternative interpretation, that there are people who take this literally. Okay, so at best then you would say it's ambiguous. There are people who have interpreted it both ways. Okay, if you have two interpretations, which one do you go with? Well, if you're saying that Jesus is claiming that he's going to be in the same situation Jonah is, Jesus called one interpretation satanic, demonic, straight from the pits of hell. How do you go with the interpretation that Jesus specifically identifies as directly from the pits of hell? On the issue as far as why would they cut someone that they thought was dead? Why would they stab him with a spear? That was you find this in other sources where if they want to be sure someone's dead, they stab him with a sword or a spear. A death blow, if you had to take someone off a cross, was standard Roman practice to make sure. Why? These guys were in quite a bit of trouble along the lines of death penalties if you let a crucified victim down and you weren't supposed to. As far as the the beating heart. Why is it that every doctor I can find on this says the opposite of what you guys are saying? What they'll say is there are multiple things that could be happening, because it just says stabbed in the side. It doesn't say pierced in the side. It doesn't say exactly where they hit him. It just says side. But I'll just quote for here, the full quote from the ending of the Journal of the American Medical Association. It says, it remains unsettled whether Jesus died of cardiac rupture or of cardiorespiratory failure. However, the important feature may not be how he died, but rather whether he died. Clearly, the weight of historical and medical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead before the wound to his side was inflicted, and supports the traditional view that the spear thrust between his right ribs probably perforated not only the right lung, but also the pericardium and heart, and thereby ensured his death.
Two questions.
Interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge, and you guys are taking it as medically obvious that he was alive.
Still waiting for the Hindu text, by the way.
We'd like the evidence for the Hindu text.
All right, that's time. Dr. Tahir and Dr. Umar, you guys got it for 4 minutes.
Can I start again? Is that all right? Yeah, I'll do it quickly.
Sorry. No, go on, Umar. So Hindu text,
okay.
King Shalivana. King Shalivana is the person who met him in the Valley of Kashmir. King Shalivana was from the 1st century. As for the original 1st century text, I don't have the original Old Testament text from 1400 BC of Moses. So this is all a meaningless kind of stupid argument, frankly. So you're going to reject the whole of the Old Testament because the earliest extant copy we have is at the time of Jesus, which is 1400 years later. It's a nonsense argument. As for the actual issue with Jonah, again, I come back to this. You talk about the weeds were wrapping around his legs and all of that. And then what happened? He was swallowed by a whale, by a fish, right? And it says in Jonah 2:1, then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly. You can't pray unless you're alive. So yes, he was close to death in the act of dying when he was in the sea, and God answered his prayer by having him swallowed by a whale. So that is in actual fact the narrative sequence of events. Umar, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'm really kind of shocked at David's argument there, to be honest. He's saying that verse 6 proves me wrong. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever, yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God, as my life was ebbing away. Verse 6 is explained by verse 7, where he says, as my life was ebbing away. Your argument is that Jonah died, and then when dead, he prayed. It's fairly hard to pray when you're dead. Okay, it's not just a different phase of, dream state. Well, if death means anything...
He prayed in the belly of the whale, it says, and that he would have already survived from the water by being eaten by the whale.
There you go as well. So, I mean, this is not a valid interpretation of the sign of Jonah, and you're imputing this upon Jesus without evidence. And as we've said, yes, there are statements that Jesus said he would be killed, but then this clearly contradicts that, and he says it's going to be his only sign, and then when he actually goes for the crucifixion, everyone is shocked. He's praying. He's calling it a trial. He believes that God's forsaking him. Again, something you haven't addressed at all, while on the cross. And then he appears again, and everyone is incredibly shocked. And he says, I'm not a ghost. I'm hungry. Can you give me some fish? Does this strike you like someone who is A, divine, and B, has, he's proving that he is actually the same person. Now, I am again startled somewhat by Ridwan's argument that the reason that the way you can explain all of this is because of Jesus's human nature. So essentially, in order to explain the clear contradictions between modern day Christian belief and the events of the gospel, Ridwan has to then appeal to the hypostatic union of Christ and the dual divine human nature of God and man in order to explain it. This is like explaining a mystery by appealing to a riddle. This isn't an explanation. You can't appeal to something which is actually more confusing, more contentious to explain something which is, rather more straightforward. I mean, this is already assuming hugely Christian doctrine in order to do so, which rests upon the reality of the death and resurrection. So you're assuming the antecedent of the precedent, whatever that is.
Yeah, absolutely. They use the resurrection to support his godhood, and they use his godhood to support the resurrection. Is a completely circular argument. I want to highlight that you haven't really answered the question of how a beating heart is still present when he's already dead. You admitted that they thought that he was dead. I didn't ask you necessarily why they cut his spear, why they cut him. We
Well, he
believe it's
said
quite evident. They did so to check whether he was alive, but you didn't explain how a heart is beating. How did it come out under pressure? Explain this to us. You don't need to be a doctor to figure this one out, buddy. It's pretty straightforward, actually. Everybody knows a heart is beating is.
we're finished.
All right, that's time right there. Thank you guys. All right, David and AP, you guys are back in the seat for your third 4-minute segment.
So we have just seen it. I asked for the supposed evidence that there was a Hindu record of Jesus appearing in India. We have asked very, very clearly where the evidence is that there was indeed such a record from the 1st century or whatever it is, because the record that we have is actually from the 18th century or the 19th century. And the response that I have received from Tahir here is that he doesn't have it, because he also doesn't have to have records of the Old Testament. Very, very fantastic. I'm not surprised, considering that our friends not only believe in Muhammad, who came 6 centuries later and said, actually, what Jesus said was this and this and this. They also hold on to the insane person who came later on in the 19th century and made claims about what people actually said 2,000 years ago. And we are supposed to just blindly trust him. Very, very funny.
Yeah, just AP, let me just add on to that. So he's comparing this Hindu source, where our earliest record of it is the 18th century, when the Hindus were dealing with missionaries, and missionaries are talking about Jesus, and then this ends up in their text. If you look at descriptions, they describe this text as a living text because people kept adding to it over time. What's the difference between that and the Old Testament? Well, we have quotations of the Old Testament all over the place. Yes. People are giving commentaries on the Old Testament. They're discussing it. They're quoting it. No one is aware of this source about Jesus being in India until the 18th century. And we're supposed to believe that it was there all along and no one ever heard of it. Very, 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 very strange.
David, I wanted to ask a few questions, and then you can go ahead and take it from there. So once again, we pointed out Jesus's human nature, his human experience. It's very obvious in Christian thinking and Christian belief why Jesus comes and has a human experience and a divine presence. And it is for the sins of man, and his death and resurrection for the atonement and so on. I brought this up because our Ahmadi opponents made it look like there is no explanation at all as to why Jesus said, Father, or God, why have you forsaken me? This is actually a quote from Psalm 22, and directly makes a biblical reference where the psalmist doesn't actually believe that God abandoned them. It makes a point, and Jesus does the same thing in his human nature, in his human form, where he also suffers for mankind and is then risen again. David, very quickly, and then you can take it from here. I still expect a response to Matthew 28, which clearly says that he died and rose from the dead. Second, also, our opponent said that in Acts we can find that there are these Asian Christians who didn't hold any of these heretical beliefs. Where in the world is that? We find Christians from different places. We don't find anywhere that there were these that there were these other righteous Christians who had these other beliefs, not the Trinitarian beliefs. This is completely made up. Plus, our Ahmadi friends sound like atheists when they doubt that a dead person or a person's soul, a person whose soul has been taken, cannot pray. David, go ahead.
Yeah, so on the issue of, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yeah, that's the difference between Muslims today and first century Jews. First century Jews heard the Psalms regularly. They would know that what Jesus was claiming. They're confused by Jesus saying that he isn't a ghost, and they think that he's showing that he had just survived. He's showing that he isn't a ghost because that's what they would have. That's what you would conclude if you knew someone is dead. They're not like our Ahmadi friends who think, oh, crucifixion, just pack some spices on there and you'll be fine and you'll be great afterwards. They understood the practice. They had seen it with their own eyes. They know that he was dead. If they saw him alive again, they would conclude that he's a ghost. He proves that he's not a ghost. He proves that he has risen from the dead. And again, this works against you. This works against you because the disciples had no concept of a Messiah who's going to die and so on. That didn't make sense to them. That's why they didn't understand it. That's why they fled. What was their ultimate takeaway? They went to their bloody deaths claiming that Jesus had risen from the dead and appeared to them, that he died on the cross for sins. Something big had to happen to convince these men, they did become convinced. Your explanation doesn't account for that.
All right, that's time. All right, Dr. Umar and Dr. Tahir, you got to back up for 4 minutes.
Omar, do you mind if I go first, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think I'll start. The reality is they're focusing on a fringe argument that we made relating to Hindu scriptures because they can't actually address the fundamental arguments that we made relating to the Christian text, and that's why they're emphasizing it. And you're absolutely right. It was given as a kind of end thing to prompt people to read into a little bit more about the life of Jesus in India. But there's actually very good books like the Fida Hasnain book. Obviously, you have to start with Jesus in India, written by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, which lays out the evidence of Jesus in Hindu texts and Buddhist texts, and also in other places in India. But the key evidence that Jesus was there in India and that he'd migrated to search the lost tribes of Israel over Nepal, Afghanistan, Kashmir, Tibet, and Pakistan and India is the fact that his tomb is there, is the fact that you can go to Jesus' tomb today and you can go and visit his tomb in Kashmir, in Srinagar, which means, in Srinagar, interestingly, actually means the site of the skull. So the place of his death, his actual death, was named after the place of his crucifixion, Golgotha, which also meant the site of the skull. As for Matthew 28, you're absolutely right. It says that he was risen. And that is entirely, it says, and go quickly, the angel says, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he's risen from the dead. This is absolutely correct. And this is in actual fact precisely what we believe, but it's an idiomatic statement. If you say that he's come from the dead, it can quite easily mean that he's come from the place of the dead, that he's risen from the place of the dead. He was buried in he was put in a tomb, in a sepulchre where the rich people were laid out, and that could easily be described as coming from the dead. This is an idiomatic form of speech. It's just shocking that you think that idiom is not a part of normal religious literature when you're all at the same time talking about.
In fact, can I interrupt for one sentence here? And say this is, this was even recorded in the Synoptics when the angels appear and they say, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" So he's saying that actually this is the place of the dead.
Exactly.
No, carry on. Sorry.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you for that. So Matthew 28 doesn't actually prove anything. In all the places he says that I will be risen from the dead, this is the true meaning of it. If indeed he said it, it means to be raised from the place of the dead. The fact that he didn't himself understand what would happen was evidenced by the fact that he prayed for the whole night for him not to die. And then as he thinks he's dying, he's saying, "God, why have you forsaken me?" Presumably because it's not going according to how he thought it would go. As for the question of why wasn't there, where are these other righteous Christians? I already showed you that the other righteous Christian was James the Just. James the Just was the leader of the early Christian community, the early Ebionite community, and he accuses Paul in Acts 21:21 of, in actual fact, forsaking the law of Moses, teaching all men everywhere against Moses and against the law and against our customs. The Jews who have believed from Asia will surely hear that you have come. And then he asks him to do the public Nazirite purification rituals. I don't understand what part of my words you don't understand. It's written in black and white. Go read Acts 21. Okay, he says it clearly. So the people who did not believe in the resurrection were all the other followers of Jesus, especially the Jews. And Paul himself, you mentioned earlier that Paul didn't, he never said that he didn't behave as a non-Jew. That's absolutely false. Paul in 1 Corinthians 19:21, he himself explicitly states that the law is not actually applicable upon him, and he was born a Jew, and he was in actual fact previously a Pharisee. So your argument that Paul preached to the Gentiles as a Gentile and then to the Jews as a Jew, no. He states in 1 Corinthians 19:21, he states very clearly that the law is not applicable. Though the law is not applicable upon me, that's exactly what he says. So you completely are wrong on that point. Have we not answered anything else? Finally, ghosts. Sorry, Omar, did you want to say anything? I want to say something about this ghost business. You've just proven my point. A ghost is a body after death. That's what a ghost is by definition. When he says I'm not a ghost, and then he proves his living by eating with them and expressing his human needs, it's a self-evident that he's saying that I'm a human body. I'm really sorry to take up all the time, sorry.
All right, David and AP, you guys are up for your final 4-minute crossfire.
AP, let me respond quickly to that last point he made, expressing human needs by taking fish. Why does the text say he was taking he was eating? To show them that he's not a ghost. He's showing them that he is resurrected. They conclude, they just said that a ghost is what is a person who is risen from the dead. That's false according to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Resurrection is not disembodied existence. Resurrection is God uniting your soul with your body in a glorified state. Again, this hurts you. It hurts you that the disciples ultimately concluded that Jesus had risen from the dead. It's made no sense to them, and that's what they believed. Something big had to happen. If you think that that Jesus eating fish means that he hadn't been resurrected, you didn't just attack Judaism and Christianity, you just attacked Islam. The Quran says over and over again, it talks about the fruits and the drinks that you'll be having in Jannah. Muhammad talked about these, talked about deflowering virgins and the great things you get to eat. And he even said what the first meal of the people of paradise after the resurrection is going to be. It's going to be the lobe of fish liver. So if you're saying that a resurrected person cannot eat, it makes no sense. You'd have to be a ghost or something like that. You just attacked Jesus. You attacked Muhammad. You attacked the Quran. You attacked all of it, all to defend Mirza Ghulam Ahmad.
I want to encourage everyone to pick up the book of Acts and look at it. Acts 21 is completely taken out of context. I will go as far as to say that our friends here are lying, because Acts 21 does not say anything at all about Christians or Jews in Asia not believing in these heretical ideas that Paul presented. The whole topic is about whether Jews or Christian Jews are to follow the law in terms of circumcision and kosher food or not. That's the entirety of the context. The law as laid out in the Jewish beliefs, the commandments of God, which are known as over 600 commandments, altogether found in the Torah. The dispute is about whether Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians are to follow the law or not. It says nothing at all about Jesus' death and resurrection. There is no dispute about it, because you will find again and again, as much as our friend might make it look like it's just idiomatic in Matthew 28, it's not. It's very clearly all over the Gospels. Jesus dies, is very clearly confirmed as dead, and is then risen from the dead. It doesn't. It's not idiomatic when it says risen from the dead. He dies, and he's buried, and he rises from the dead. He comes back alive.
Along with that, AP, on the point about the Apostle Paul and them saying Paul repented. Well, you of course have Paul preaching Jesus' death and resurrection before that, but after that, Acts 26, Paul says, same context. Now he's before King Agrippa. He says, "To this day I have had the help that comes from God, and so I stand here testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come to pass, that the Christ must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles." If that's a guy who repented of his belief in Jesus' death and resurrection, he has a very strange way of showing it.
Yep. And once again,
do we have more time, Marlon?
I would say don't cherry pick the Bible. Don't cherry pick the Bible. Either you take it or you leave it aside. If you take it, then take it as it is, and also talk about why Jesus is the only person to be born with a mother but no father.
All right. All right, that expires the time right there. Thank you guys for, I think Umar and Tahir got one more 4 minutes, right? All right, you guys got it for 4 minutes.
Okay, so a few quick things. So firstly, Jesus wasn't the only person to be born of virgin. It also says in the Quran that Adam was as well. That's number one. Number two, eating. The Quran makes it very clear. No, it's true. The Quran makes it clear. It says in the Holy Quran that the case of Adam is as the case of Jesus. Allah says to him, "Be," and he was. So your whole point is irrelevant. The purpose for him of a virgin was to show that none among the Jews was worthy of being the father of the Messiah, because prophethood was to be transferred from the house of Ishmael, house of Jacob, to the house of Isaac, to the house of Ishmael. As for the issue of eating, the Quran again makes it very clear that the paradise is such that no eye has heard, nor any ear. The Prophet Muhammad made clear, no eye has heard, seen, nor has any ear heard, nor has any mind conceived of what is the nature of paradise. So the nature of the food is absolutely not is absolutely different. And obviously expressing physical needs and consuming that in this life indicates you have an ongoing physical body, which can't be glorified if you're going to have to depend upon ordinary human stuff. It's completely meaningless. The Acts 21, I would like to quickly share my screen again. So I can't share it seems. But I want to read to you, first of all, I got the reference slightly wrong. It's 1 Corinthians 9:19 through to 21. Paul particularly says that he says that the gospel, that the law of Christ is, I may have to check this, but I think I may have got the wrong reference again, but I'll find it out and I'll mention it later as well. He says, yes, here it is. Yes, exactly. Verse 21, 1 Corinthians 9:21. So he says, very clear, to them that are without law, as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ. So he says that he's not under God's law, but under the law to Christ. In Acts 21, again, you're just completely misrepresenting the reality. Paul's arrival at Jerusalem, Acts 21:20, he says, when they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. Now, if they're zealous for the law, then why didn't they accept Paul's atoning sacrifice doctrines? And he says here, they have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to their customs. So this idea that there isn't some rift is completely nonsense, and it is about atonement. It's about the relevance of atonement to turning away the need for the law of Moses. Omar?
Oh, I didn't know you were coming to me. Did I have anything? Yeah, David, you keep on talking about how something big happened. In your belief, nothing really happened because God apparently demonstrated his omnipotence in a slightly incoherent, confusing way. But ultimately, you believe that Jesus told all of his disciples, by the way, guys, I'm going to be killed, and then I'm going to come back, and it's going to be fine, we're all going to be good. Okay, we're all very confused how all the events of the crucifixion line up with those statements, but that's your belief. So if he comes back afterwards and he's done that, nothing big happened. What actually happened in your view? It went exactly as it was supposed to have done. So they shouldn't have been shocked. They shouldn't have been surprised. They should have said, yeah, that's what I expected, just what we planned for this Sunday, and hopefully this will be commemorated forevermore. This was regular and ordinary according to the knowledge that they already had. What the Gospels actually document is that they are shocked. Now, why are they shocked? Because they didn't think that he would survive. They thought he died. If they thought that he was supposed to survive, why would they be shocked that he's come back? In fact, this was the actual sign. This was the big thing that happened. That Jesus, when he looked like he would die, when he said nothing, he was in his defense, is absolutely heroic. He's before Pilate and they accuse him of things and Caiaphas, and he just says nothing. He relies on God and he was vindicated. And that was the sign of his truth. That was the big thing which proves that Jesus is true. If you don't accept that, then actually you have no real reason to believe that he was a holy and true man.
All right. Thank you guys so much for that crossfire. Very engaging. Very, very, very good. Very good. Appreciate you guys so much for your time. And so now we're going to transition to the closing remarks, which will be 5-minute closings. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A. So audience, get your questions in. Some of you guys, man, some of the questions, then you guys put them as super chats too. Some of y'all know y'all wrong. But nonetheless, 5-minute closing, guys. And then we'll jump into the Q&A. So get your questions in, audience, so we can have a fantastic Q&A. That said, David and AP, you guys are up for your 5-minute.
Actually,
you want to switch
Marlon, if we reversed it, then last time they went first and last. We went with the British style, so.
Okay, all right. So Dr. Tahir and Dr. Umar, you guys are first for the for your closing. And so I'll get you guys up. Let me get your 5-minute timer up real quick because I got the 4-minute up. Let me adjust that to 5. And so, all right. So you guys a 5-minute timer, then I'll start your time as soon as you guys begin to speak.
I want to zoom out for a minute and just take stock of the world that we're in at the moment. We are in a very atheistic, secular world, which has lost a lot of belief in God. And we have, I would say, unfortunately, to a large extent, a kind of Western monoculture that has spread all over the world. And with it has spread an undermining of belief in God and a kind of atheism and secularism that has spread through that. Now, if we look back historically, we can see that this was associated with an increase in scientific knowledge and science and an emphasis on reason. When the West became more rational and more scientific, it had to break away from the Bible. It had to break away from belief in Christianity. That has been the trend, and that accelerated its material development, which spread all over the world. And there's a reason, and I think that reason was very well demonstrated by Ridwan. And for me, what I think is the highlight and the most telling moment of this entire debate, which is when we finally came to the point, which is how do you explain the events and Jesus' behavior and those of his disciples, but especially Jesus' behavior around the time of the crucifixion? He has to appeal to the dual nature of Christ as being both man and God, something which is literally unintelligible because it's saying like someone is both hot and cold at the same time, here and also there. Believing in two separate, completely opposite natures and saying that they are one in one, and then appealing to this to explain otherwise, unintelligible events is anti-rational, as is the belief that God is three and one. These are anti-rational doctrines, which is why the West, as it became more rational and scientific, it had to discard Christianity. The opposite is what you see in the Islamic world and historically in Islam. As they were extremely religious, especially in the early parts, they laid a great emphasis on rational development, on reason, and they hugely advanced the sciences, taking from the Greeks and the Indians and even the Chinese, actually, and developed their science. And as they drifted away from spirituality, as they drifted away from religion, they became less reasonable and rational, we can say, in the contemporary Muslim world. So there's a difference here. The Christian world, as it becomes more rational, it becomes less scientific. In the Islamic world, as it is more religious, it becomes more scientific. Because Islam is something which actually accords with human reason, whereas Christianity has doctrines, modern day Christianity, Pauline Christianity, almost by design, I would say, or Paul's design, has as its basis things which are anti-rational. And so when we have come and we have given you a narrative that actually makes sense of the Gospels, that says, yes, this is not 100% a reliable text, but you can extract a lot of value from it. And you do this by going by the statements that are repeated, especially, and which are and the events which are well attested to and which make a narrative which you can rely upon. And when you do that, you actually find that the hypothesis that better supports is the idea that Jesus believed that he was to undergo a trial, but that God would save him, that he underwent that trial, he never died, but he survived. That is the best that you can do from the Gospels, and you can only do that in light of that wonderful verse that my brother Tahir has so eloquently explained and expounded upon, that shows that Jesus appeared as if he had died upon the cross to many, but he actually had not. And then he continued to fulfill his mission to the children of Israel, as the Quran says. And to this day, you have a continuing community of people who call themselves Christian Muslims in Kashmir. And you have the grave there, which is buried in the Jewish tradition, and which the locals for millennia have said this belonged to Jesus. Why? Because the tribes of Israel had migrated over into Asia, many of them settling in Kashmir, and that's why he went there. Again, the Christians, our Christian and Ridwan, have not given any explanation for how he fulfilled the statement of his that he would go onto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. We believe that he did, and this is an emerging trend that actually we believe in Jesus. We believe in the Jesus of the Gospels. We don't believe in every single statement that is imputed to him, because we say, well, some of them just don't make sense in line with all of the others and with all the events. So yeah, we can't accept those. But actually, the Jesus of the Gospels is someone that we believe in much more than our interlocutors. I apologize, Brother Tahir, I've only given you 30 seconds at the end.
No, I just wanted to highlight this quote in the Bible about Paul. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia who had seen him in the temple stirred up the whole crowd. These are the Jews who had believed in Jesus. They seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help. This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against our people, our law, and this place. I'm with them. I'm with them, and so should you be." They knew Jesus better than this Pharisee plant who was there to destroy Jesus' movement from within.
All right.
Which Islam say.
All right, thank you for that closing. Appreciate it. All right, David and AP, you guys are up for your 5-minute closing, and I will start your time as soon as you begin to speak.
All right. Our friends have something very funny just happened. When I pointed out toward the end of our final time that it's odd that Jesus is the only human who is born with a mother but no father, Tahir started talking, and he then said that this is not true because Adam was also born of a virgin. What? Adam is Adam is the first human. the first human, the first man, created with not born of a virgin. He's created
Maybe
when there is no
Mirza
other
had something
human
different.
alive. It's a very strange and silly comparison to make. You know what God does in these religions, in these religious beliefs, is that there is no life, and God Himself, He creates life where there is none. He breathes life into something where there is no life, and thereby creates life. This is actually a regular Jewish idea that is very strong. This goes into even ancient Jewish mythology of golems and so on, where only a divine being can breathe life into something inanimate and turn it into something living. But you know who else does that in Islam? Very, very funny. In Islam, Jesus also does that. In Quran chapter 3, verse 49, Jesus literally breathes life into clay birds and turns them into real birds. This is a story in the Quran adopted from heretical Christians or Gnostics that emerged later on, and who started ascribing different ideas to Jesus to further embellish him because he is God, to explain how he was always God even when he was a child, and they depict him as breathing life into inanimate beings. The Quran adopts this idea, and Jesus is, according to the Quran, the only human who is born of a virgin without a father, and the only person, the only being aside from God who also breathes life into inanimate beings. You know why this happened? It's because Islam adopted Jesus without understanding anything about Jesus. Because Islam, this is what Islam does. Islam is an ignorant religion that comes out of a completely devoid 7th century desert, where people believed that the earth was on the back of a whale and dangling around. And Muhammad then adopted these ideas from Jews and Christians, and without understanding them, and imported whatever he heard. He was called the ear who believes everything that people say. This is directly in the Quran. He adopted Jesus as a figure without understanding anything about him. He adopted Judaism without understanding anything about him, which is why we are left with a completely ignorant but also brilliantly arrogant religion, just like our arrogant friends here who know nothing at all about the Bible, who know nothing at all about the Abrahamic tradition, who are completely disconnected, but who always claim that everyone got it wrong and they got it right.
Yeah, so the final thoughts here. He said that they said the dual nature of Christ is absurd. I mean, human beings have a dual nature. The Quran has a dual nature. It's supposedly the eternal speech of Allah and yet a physical book. So if they're once again throwing Islam under the bus, they say science somehow goes against Christianity. All of the pioneers of the scientific revolution were Christians of one sort or another. Check out Science in the Muslim World for a comparison. They said that in my belief, nothing really happened because Jesus rose from the dead and Jesus had been talking about it. So what with the confusion? These guys believed that the Messiah was coming to destroy the Romans. So they weren't taking his words literally when he was saying that he was going to die and rise from the dead. They're wondering. It specifically says it. They didn't understand. Eventually, they came to understand. What could have convinced them that the Messiah was actually dying and rising from the dead? It had to be something big to shake them out of their standard convictions and to shake them out of that ignorance. Them seeing a hobbling body that barely survived crucifixion would not have done that. Jesus actually rising from the dead and proving it to them would. The sign of Jonah, they keep going to verse 7 and then ignoring the verses that come before it where Jonah says that he was dead and in Sheol, because they say, well, it says, when my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord. Yes, he returns to the issue. He starts off with that. Then he returns to it to compare him praying to God and other people praying to idols. You can't interpret verse 6 in the light of that when he says that he was dead. Then at the end, they said Paul was a Pharisee plant. Paul was a Pharisee plant. That's their theory now, that he's a Pharisee who went in there to destroy Christianity, the message of Jesus from within. And yet, how does he do this? By starting the world's largest false religion? Why is that what the Pharisees wanted? So I would say this is insane. And once again, they contradict what Allah says. What does Allah say in Surah 61, verse 14? He says that he aided the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost. What kind of Christianity became uppermost in the world? The sort that Paul believed in. And therefore, if you say Paul was wrong, he's a plant and so on, Allah helped the wrong guy. Shame on Allah. Poor Allah, once again.
All right, all right. Thank you guys for a fantastic debate. Really do appreciate you guys, man. This is a long one, so I appreciate very thorough subject matter as well. I definitely appreciate you guys' efforts in this debate, and so we're going to jump into the Q&A now. And a lot of the questions are sort of like, you know, I don't know if I want to ask them because of the nature of them, and partially because they're not dealing with the subject matter of the debate. They're sort of other questions, but we do have a super chat coming from IP. I think everyone knows IP, Mike Jones. He's kind of popular on YouTube.
Mike Jones.
Mike Jones, what's up, IP? Thank you for the question and the support, man. This is coming. This is for Dr. Tahir, Dr. Umar. Where in Acts 21 does it say any Christian holds to the swoon theory? Acts chapter 21 verse 21 says the issue was Paul was accused of saying the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses.
Exactly.
Mike, can you hear me? Yeah, I never claimed that it was. I never claimed that the Christians, that the Jews who accepted the Messiah, the Ebionites, that they in Acts 21 believed in the swoon theory. When did I say that? What I pointed out was that Ridwan opened his entire debate by saying that the crucifixion is linked to the atonement. That's him who brought that up. So I demonstrated that in Acts 21, they clearly and categorically reject the atonement. They clearly state that, as I've read it already, James, who was, remember, the brother of Jesus and the leader of the Jews, he'd actually lived with Jesus his entire life. He'd actually known Jesus his entire ministry. He himself says, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. This is the law that Paul writes is not necessary to be followed. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to their customs. The reason you didn't have to follow the law, according to Paul, was because Christ's death was made a curse for the law. He was made a curse for you, so that he took the law of the curse of the law upon himself. So the atonement is directly related to crucifixion. So when James here rejects the atoning sacrifice, he's rejecting what Paul himself said, which is that the law is not applicable upon him, which gives the lie. 1 Corinthians 9:19-23, Paul says that he, as a Jew, the law is not applicable upon him, which gives the lie to the idea that he was, in actual fact,
you're moving the goalpost now. What your actual claim was that Paul introduced the idea that Jesus died and was crucified and so on. That this was not that he was crucified, he died and was resurrected. That this was not something that was held. You made that assertion. You made that assertion about Acts. You also make it look like the Ebionites were these early Christians. The first sources about the Ebionites are from the 2nd century. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, guys,
sorry, he's just misquoting me. I didn't say that. I said that Paul claimed that his death and resurrection was revealed to him, not by any man. This is not my word. This is your favorite teacher, Paul.
Yeah, and then I quoted him right after. To here, and then I quoted him right after that, where he says he went up to Jerusalem to make sure that it lined up with the teachings of the original disciples. Why do you quote him saying that and leave out the rest? Because it completely refutes what you're saying. If Paul's going against all these guys,
guys.
He specifically said it. He says he went up to make sure.
All right. We're gonna move on. We're gonna move on from this question. And I should have said, hold on, guys. I should have said this at the beginning of this Q&A. Is that you guys get 1 minute each uninterrupted. So not only did we violate the 1 minute, but
Marlon.
Yes.
If because we didn't lay out any guidelines for the Q&A. Normally it's whoever the person is, the question is addressed to, they would get 2 minutes, and then the other side can get like a 1 minute optional rebuttal or something like that. If you wanted to keep it orderly, that's
yeah. As long as you guys are good with, we can roll with that. If you guys are fine with that. Okay. All right. So 2 minutes for the one who's getting the question initially, and then 1 minute for a response from the other team. All right. Let's roll with it. All right. So see what you did, Mike. You got the Q&A all roughed up, man. See that Mike
Shame on
Jones?
him.
Shame on Mike Jones.
Shame on you.
Don't go to Mike. Don't go to Inspiring Philosophy.
All right, let me.
All your shame, so there's no shame to be
All right, let me see these questions. See, these questions are tough, man, because you got a lot of these comments who are just off the wall. So it's really
some of
difficult
AP's
here.
fans coming over. Some of AP's fans trying to.
Here's a question, and this is for Dr. Tahir, Dr. Umar. It's a question, but it may play some relevance in how the Muslims participated or interpreted the crucifixion, so to speak. So let me see what you guys think here. This is coming from Answering LDS, and the question, thank you for the super chat as well, Answering LDS. The question is, where were the Muslims in history before Muhammad? So perhaps this question could be applied to the understanding of the crucifixion, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Omar, you're muted. Omar, you're muted. Nobody can hear you.
Sorry. Okay, I'll try and link it if I can, but I'll have to answer the question essentially. So I've got 2 minutes. Okay. Where were the Muslims in history before Muhammad? Islam, and to be a Muslim means to submit to the will of God. So we believe, and this is a defining and quite beautiful feature of Islam, and quite a unique feature, that the Quran says that every people had a messenger. So we don't believe that salvation was left to any people on earth. Every people had prophets and messengers, and this helps to make sense of how we have all of these different religious founders all across the world who have preached broadly similar messages. Obviously, there are differences, and some of those differences have been interpolated and exaggerated over the ages, and scriptures can be messed with. However, we don't believe that any people were left out. So all of these people were Muslims in the sense that they submitted to God and to God's will. And that's why they refer to this as such in the Holy Quran. Now, what makes Islam different to the previous religions was that it was the first religion and the last religion, the only religion for all people for all times. Okay? So we believe that, yes, different people had religions for their time according to their different issues and their temperaments, but Islam came for all peoples for all time when humanity got to a point where it could bear a global religion, and thus the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the final law-bearing prophet. Now, how this links to the crucifixion, well, we believe that the disciples were true and that they believed in their prophet, who was Jesus, and for him, he was the way and the light. Right? Because he said that. But actually, every prophet says that I am the way and I am the light. They all speak in this kind of language because they are all the guide for their time. But the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the light and the way for all people subsequent for all time.
So we get a minute?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to point out, interestingly, on the issue of previous Muslims, because the issue is you go back to people and it's like they don't sound like Muslim, but the early generations of Muslims did believe that these previous generations were Muslims, and that included the disciples of Jesus, but interestingly included the Apostle Paul. So one of the most respected Muslim commentators of all time, Qurtubi, commenting on Surah 61, verse 14, which I quoted, said, "It was said that this verse was revealed about the apostles of Jesus. May peace and blessings be upon him." Ibn Asaq stated that the apostles and disciples that Jesus sent to preach there were Peter and Paul, who went to Rome. And you have other commentators like Tabari and so on who agreed, but why? They were looking at history through the lens of what the Quran says. The Quran says that these guys were Muslims. The Quran says that Allah aided the true followers of Jesus, and therefore they were forced to conclude Peter, Paul, all these guys were Muslims because that's what the Quran says.
All right.
But how are we doing this now? We're getting like two minutes, and for one.
2 minutes. No, it's 2 minutes for the
2 minutes for whoever the question is directed at. I'm guessing most of the questions will be for Tahir and Umar.
That sounds like a terrible idea, but I'm not surprised since David suggested it.
Yeah, we're trying to be. If a question's directed to them, then the question's directed to them.
All right, I'm trying to. I'm working vigorously to try to find questions for David and AP. Let me see here.
I don't mind equalizing it if that's fairer for everybody. I don't mind that.
What's that?
I don't mind equalizing refutation time, but I mean, if you feel that's fairer, as in 2 minutes, 2 minutes, I don't mind.
No, we can. I think we keep it. I think we keep it at 2 minutes, 1 minut. That's fine. That's fine. I think it's fine.
Tahir was just trying to avoid hearing AP complain.
Oh. All right. So
Agnostics.
let's see.
Am I right? They always complain.
All right. Here is a question. It's difficult. Some of these questions are rough, man. Oh man.
We're very much used to it, so don't worry about it. Just throw it at us.
I'm okay
Right,
with sitting here and just listening. It's fine.
So here's a question here. The Muslims appeal to explanatory power, probability, etc. to support their view. Are you not aware these criterion are why most scholars conclude that Jesus was crucified?
So, Imar, if you don't mind. So I fully agree. There's nothing in the Islamic text of the Quran which states that Jesus wasn't crucified. In fact, as I've highlighted multiple times, when the words of the Quran state وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, but rather he appeared to them as so, in other words, as one dead, right? It meant that they actually had to be looking at him. If I say Marlon's here, he looks very hale and hearty today. That cannot be a true statement unless I'm actually looking at Marlon. If Marlon's in another country and I'm looking at a guy who looks like Marlon, then my statement unknowingly is wrong. So when God says in the Quran that he was made to them to appear as one dead on the cross, then it must mean that Jesus was present before them. This demonstrates clearly and categorically that the substitution theory is absolutely false. That has no place in Islam. What it actually comes from, the substitution theory, is the fact that a large number of Christians accepted Islam in the 7th century, in the 8th century, in the 9th century. They brought with them the belief in the ascension of Christ. But what they had to do is they had to put the ascension of the Christ prior to the crucifixion, because they couldn't have it existing after a death and resurrection event, because that's contrary to what the explicit words of the Quran state. So what they did was they then took the ascension idea, put it before the crucifixion, said somebody else was crucified, but that's contradicted by the Quran itself. So in answer to your question, we accept that he was put on the cross, but what we say is that he survived the crucifixion, and that is what is borne out by the events of the crucifixion. Principally, the evidence that he actually survived the crucifixion was that he survived the crucifixion. He was seen after the crucifixion with his wounds asking for food, which in any normal circumstance, you see a person after an assassination attempt, you would conclude that they survived rather than that they died and were resurrected.
All right.
We actually, it's interesting because we actually agree on something. We agree that substitution theory, which has historically been the dominant Muslim view, is very problematic. So we agree on that. And I would kind of part ways with AP in that I believe that 4:157 is open to multiple interpretations, especially when you bring in other Quran. I think it sounds very clear on its own, but when there are other verses, I think you can interpret it in light of other verses, but at best, I would say that it's ambiguous. As far as Jesus' death by crucifixion, my goodness, Jesus said that it would happen. His apostles went to their bloody death saying that he died on the cross and rose from the dead. We have multiple witnesses. We have Jewish sources, Roman sources, Christian sources in the Bible, Christian sources from the next generation of Christians. Again, people who knew the apostles. Polycarp knew the apostle John. You know what Polycarp didn't say? He didn't say, Paul's a liar and he contradicts John. They were all on the same page about Jesus' death and resurrection. And as far as scholars are concerned, they understand if you have a guy who gets crucified, and we know how Roman crucifixion works, that he died. They wouldn't believe in the resurrection, but everyone across the board agrees that he died. There's a reason. The evidence is that good, which means if you go against it, you just got a problem.
You see how the Ahmadis have quickly bewitched David so that he starts agreeing with them.
I'll say I've always say if I agree with someone on something. It's it. By the way, AP, that took a while. That took a while to see, but I eventually saw maybe 4:157 isn't as clear as lots of Muslims have thought it was. You're still on the wrong side of that one, but
I will fight you.
Took me time. You can have time.
All right, guys. All right, here's a question, and yeah, once again, it's for Tahir and Umar. It says, "How do you explain the millions of Muslim teachers of substitutionary theory? Were they poor exegetes or deliberately are deceptive?"
I mean, am I mute? So, I mean, Brother Tharit, you can jump in, but I'll just briefly. There's a well-known phenomenon called Israeli art, which is the importing of Christian and sometimes Jewish, but mainly Christian ideas into Islam as Christians converted over centuries. So we believe it was something which came in over time. And there was also a hadith which we would consider false, which vaguely supports this idea. But we believe that it's something that was actually imported in and was corrupted through conversions over centuries. I mean, this isn't that surprising that religious beliefs drift as you have large population changes over time. But I mean, it's quite clear that the so many early Muslims, including all the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, believed that Jesus, peace be upon him, died a natural death, and many early Islamic scholars said so. It's a research topic, though, fundamentally. It's not a doctrinal issue.
There's lots of, I mean, as I said, Ibn Abbas, may Allah pleased with him, he famously said, quoted in Sahih Bukhari, "Mutawafika" means mumituka, which is an interpretation of how Jesus died. Mutawafika, he was taken by God. He says it means mumituka, to die. Also, you have examples of the early companions. The first consensus was that Muhammad, peace be upon him, had died just as the previous prophets to him had died. So it's the earliest Muslims, and the Imam Malik, the one who made the first compilation of traditions, he also said his view was that Jesus died a natural death. So there's the earliest ones actually believe the Ahmadi position.
All right, David and AP.
Yeah, I've actually gone through all of the earliest Islamic commentaries. I can't find anyone who agrees with that. I know you have quotes like that. I agree on what mutawafika means. I don't think it necessarily means die a natural death, but as it's used in Surah 3, verse 55, mutawafika refers to God's taking the soul away from the body, and he can take away your soul when you sleep and then put it back in you, and then you wake up. But if he doesn't put it back in you, then that's when you're dead. So and by the way, that's why commentators like Ibn Kathir said that since that word is used, it must mean that right before Allah miraculously rescued him and took him to heaven and disguised someone else, that he actually fell asleep. Because if you rule out the interpretation that he fell asleep, it means that he died. And so defenders of the substitution theory have said that it must mean that Jesus for some reason fell asleep right before Allah took him.
All right. And there was a question here. I asked this one right here. This is for both of you guys, both parties, both teams. And I'll let David.
Both, then we could go 2 and 2. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll let David and AP answer this one first. Express your best historical argument for your argument.
Who's going first?
AP, you and AP.
You want me to start, or do you want to start, AP?
I can briefly just say that that my opening basically started with this, which was that it is the scholarly consensus among non-Christian scholars, even, and Christian scholars, and so on, that the one thing that can be known, this is also something that I talked with Bart Ehrman about extensively, the one thing that can be known about Jesus is that he was definitely killed by crucifixion. And furthermore, after that, the earliest records of Christians, of his followers, who are also praised in the Quran as being upheld by Allah and made superior over everyone else. What they believed from the very early teachings was that Jesus died and by crucifixion and was resurrected, and so on. So
Yeah, so yeah, I would just add along the same line. So you have, I mean, you have the four Gospels, you have the Book of Acts, you have the writings of Paul, you have the letter of Peter, you have the next generation of Christians who knew the apostles, so Ignatius and Polycarp and Clement of Rome and so on, and then you even have non-Christian sources, Roman, Jewish. Everyone's on the same page reporting Jesus was crucified, and they were familiar with how crucifixion worked. You put that together with the scholarly consensus. It's similar. It's similar when you're talking about what had to shake the apostles out of their view that the Messiah couldn't die. When I say it had to be something big, because that was a foreign idea. If they just changed their idea, if they just changed their idea, something had to convince them to change their idea. Something did convince them, and it's a similar parallel when you're talking about non-Christian scholars, so atheist scholars, agnostic scholars, Jewish scholars. There are scholars who will disagree on almost everything about Jesus. They'll differ widely on his teachings, on what happened, and so on. Across the board, they happen to agree on this one issue. Why? Ask them. They're the ones saying that it's indisputable. They're the one that's saying it's an indisputable fact of history. So something is convincing scholars that isn't convincing our Muslim friends here.
So, I mean, the beauty of our argument is that it's actually a confluence of many extremely strong historical arguments coming together. It's about all the different events, and when you piece them together, they form one coherent argument. So I don't need to depend on any single one. What is actually also very interesting from our historical perspective is that most of the evidence that all these, Christian and atheist scholars, etc., who believe that Jesus underwent crucifixion was seen after, the majority of that would still be compatible with our view, because the point of contention was whether he died or not whether he was put on the cross, not whether he was seen afterwards. So it's a bit of an illusion to say that it's all the scholarly consensus is on one side and not the other. Not that scholarly consensus, to be honest, means that much in my view. But I think the best argument that he didn't die is that he was alive, right? He was there afterwards. Why would you jump to the idea that someone died and came back to life when you could just have the idea that, well, he didn't die in 6 hours and survived an assassination attempt? People do survive assassination attempts. Jesus said he would, and he had the support of God. There is no reason to actually jump to the idea of death and resurrection unless one is steeped in a Christian dogma already. Brother Tahir, maybe I left a little bit of time for you.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I think that I always like to jibe that the best evidence that he didn't die is that he didn't die. In other words, you're only positing resurrection because you a priori believe that he is in actual fact the Son of God. So I said before, resurrection is used to support his sonship of God, and sonship of God or godhood is used to support the resurrection. If you take away the premise that he's God and you look at it purely as an individual who goes through an assassination attempt and is then seen afterwards with the wounds on his body, saying that he's been risen, it makes very clear religious idiomatic sense that he survived.
All right. And here's a question for you, Tahir and Umar. It says, no, that didn't go through. Hold on one second. Why didn't it go through? It was about the Islamic dilemma. Let me see. Where's it? Where'd it go?
Islamic dilemma.
Yeah, I think the question basically wanted you to steel man the Islamic dilemma.
The guy has a dilemma as to he really likes the Islamic arguments, but he doesn't want to be a Muslim because it requires him to do things, whereas Christianity just get a free pass because you just believe Jesus died for his sins and that's it. So that's the Islamic dilemma.
Are you being glib?
No.
I don't really. The Islamic dilemma, I've just Googled it, but I don't know if I want to rely on this. Is someone able to...
You want me to break it down real quick? Yeah. Okay. So,
sure,
and then you guys can respond. Anyway, they were asking you to steel man, which is kind of always fun. You know what steel manning is? That's when you represent the argument as well as you can, even if you disagree with it. But yeah, the Islamic dilemma is we've kind of touched on it that, and you guys responded to it a bit. But the Quran, Surah 7, verse 157, Surah 3, verses 3 to 4, 547, 568, 566. these passages talk about the gospel. And like, Surah 5, verse 68 says that the Jews and Christians have no ground to stand upon unless they stand upon the Torah, the gospel, and all the revelation that has come to them from their Lord. So the Quran is affirming the Jewish and Christian scriptures, and yet the Quran contradicts the Jewish and Christian scriptures on fundamental doctrine. So the dilemma, when it's said as a dilemma, it goes like this. Either Christians have the inspired, preserved, authoritative word of God, or we don't. We've got something corrupt or something like that. If we have the inspired, preserved, authoritative word of God, Islam is false because Islam contradicts what we have. If the other possibility, if we don't have the inspired, preserved, authoritative word of God, Islam is still wrong because the Quran affirms the inspiration and the preservation and the authority of our scriptures. It says things like no one can change Allah's words and things like that. And so the idea is, either way, whether we have the word of God or don't have the word of God, Islam is false. So I think it was asking you to steel man that, but I kind of just gave you what the argument is. So I know you guys reject the argument, and you earlier you cited Surah 5, verse 48. By the way, a little side note, I'd be interested in having some sort of future discussion or something on that, because this argument takes a while to unpack and then read through the verses. And if you're quoting 548 and so on, takes a while to go through. But yeah, so that's the Islamic dilemma.
Yeah, so I'm very happy to answer that question. It's very easy to answer, actually. If I can just share my screen really briefly, if that's all right. The window I want is this one. As you can see here, it says, I think you can even probably see the words as we go through them. وَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ, and let the people of the gospel judge according to what Allah has revealed in it. Now, these words therein, fihi, in it, and also the word revealed, indicates that it is not the whole gospel that the people are being asked to judge by. It is what is revelation therein, not the opinions of men, not the opinions of this person wrote this and this and this. Islam takes a very different view on what is revealed. A person writing his thoughts and his feelings about things doesn't make it revelation, okay? What is revealed is what God says and also what the prophets say in his name, okay? So if you wanted to take the red line gospel, you could take that and look at that, for example. But in particular, when we look at the fact that Jesus, in actual fact, himself preached and taught us and told us that his words would be interpolated, there would be corruption, there would be weeds sown among the wheat. There would be one who would enter the gate of his disciples, not through the gate, but through climbing over the fence. And this is what Paul did. He claimed a vision falsely, and then he contradicted his vision three separate occasions. When he told about his vision, he gave all the different accounts. One he can see and he can't hear, the other one he can hear, he can't see. He's clearly lying and making it up so he could pretend to be a follower of Jesus, which is why the disciples then look at him, and when they first meet him, it says that they were afraid of him. So I don't know if you can see me now, but so this is what I would say is the simple argument, is that in particular, and I'll summarize here, in particular what is revealed in especially refers to Jesus' parables. This is why Jesus spoke in parables, because he knew his teachings would be interpolated after him. So he spoke in a way in giving teachings through stories such that they cannot be interpolated. And so what the Christian should judge by is the teachings of Jesus in terms of his parables. And if you read the very next verse, it also tells you that the Quran is the guardian over the book, over all of the scriptures. So you have to actually follow the Quran for the correct doctrines.
All right. And here is a question here. Let me get it, find it. I'm going to try to smooth this question out a little bit. Thank you for the super chat. It says, good job to Secret Christian AP and the Nerdy Old Man. For Muslims, why would Allah knowingly start a false religion by being deceptive?
Can I
This is
What's that?
Yeah, the question is.
Question for Muslims. Okay, I saw AP and Nerdy Old Man. Someone, you should block that person for insulting us, James. Marlon. I keep saying James because I normally do debates with on Modern Day Debate, and that's James. So sorry about that, Marley.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting question. My brother can elaborate. I'll give a brief answer because I know we only have a minute or two. We believe that Jesus was actually eminently successful in his mission to preach unto the 12 tribes of Israel, Messianic Judaism. And what we believe was allowed to spread as Christianity was Paul's teachings, which spread not in Asia amongst the tribes of Israel, but amongst others, especially the Europeans. And that's why it became a predominantly European religion. Meanwhile, the Messianic Christianity, or the Messianic Judaism, rather, I should say, was something which, there is evidence for in the first 7 centuries of that millennium. And then we believe that they became Muslim. So actually, Paul was unable to corrupt and unable to undermine Jesus's core mission to preach to the tribes of Israel, but he was allowed, or rather those teachings were allowed to spread amongst the pagans, because from our view, we don't mean to be insulting here, but this is misguidance upon misguidance. So they're already in spiritual darkness, and a different form of misguidance spread among them, and that was not something which undermined Jesus' core mission. So Jesus was successful, incredibly successful in our view. However, this doctrine, or these doctrines of Paul's, was allowed to spread, and ultimately Islam would come to defeat it doctrinally. And we actually believe that this is a particular Ahmadiyya interpretation, that the modern day Christianity constitutes the doctrinal aspect of the Antichrist, because it is literally anti-Christos, it is anti-Christ, and it is associated with a civilization that has caused a lot of harm around the world. So we believe that the Messianic Islam in Ahmadiyya Islam has come as an antidote to that.
All right, David and AP.
Yeah. The accusation against deception would apply more clearly and obviously to substitution theory, where Allah is actually deliberately disguising someone else to make him look like Jesus. So it wouldn't quite apply to Ahmadis in the same way. Although you'd have to wonder, because again, Allah says that He helped the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost, and guess what? The uppermost version of Christianity affirms Paul. And you still stuck with the issue on Jesus, because now we have that you should affirm the parables of Jesus, or we should believe in the parables of Jesus. In the parable of the tenants, Jesus says that they're going to say, "This is the heir, come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. And so even in Jesus' parables, He says he's going to be killed. And yet we wouldn't take that. It must be the Apostle Paul writing the parables of Jesus, I guess. I don't know.
All right. And here's a question here for both sides. David and AP, if you guys want to take this one first. How likely is it a man would have survived the crucifixion just based upon survival rates of crucifixion?
Do you want me to answer, or you want to answer, AP?
You can go ahead.
Okay, on the issue of survivability, we have a record of one person surviving crucifixion when they were deliberately trying to make him survive crucifixion. This is when Josephus joined sides with the Romans in an effort to try and minimize the deaths. And in exchange for Josephus joining them, he said, "Hey, you got my 3 friends there. Can you take them down off the cross? They've just been crucified." They took them down. 2 of them died anyway. 1 of them survived. The Romans crucified and estimated, I think, between 100,000 and 350,000 people. We have a record, as far as I'm aware, of 1 person surviving who was, they tried to get him to survive. So you have to say extremely low probability of someone surviving crucifixion. And when you just come in and say, well, but he was wrapped in spices, and those are healing spices, or aloes and myrrh or whatever, yeah, that will help with a sunburn. As far as our Ahmadi friends claiming that Nicodemus discovered the cure for crucifixion, that aloes are the cure for crucifixion, I would say this is borderline more miraculous than believing in the resurrection. Difference is Jesus said he would die and rise from the dead. His disciples said he died and rose from the dead. Even modern scholars, atheists and agnostics, agree that he died by crucifixion. They agree that his followers became convinced that he rose from the dead, even though they don't believe he rose from the dead, as far as the atheists and agnostic scholars. they do believe that Jesus' followers became convinced that he had risen from the dead and appeared to them. And so this is all part of the evidence that we need to consider. And I have to say, this fits much more comfortably with the Christian view than with an idea that Jesus survived, and so Jesus' words are wrong. His disciples all got it wrong. The angel got it wrong. Everyone got it wrong. Scholars have got it wrong. Everyone's just wrong about this, except for Ahmadis.
Maybe we could test it.
Can I chime in there if that's right, Omar?
Yep.
So,
Yeah, this was to both of us. Yep.
Great. The reality is the Holy Quran in chapter 5, verse 14 is very clear that previous scriptures have been interpolated, and this speaks slightly to your question about, this speaks to what you've just said, David, but also to your question about the Islamic dilemma. It says, so because they're breaking their covenant, we have cursed them and have hardened their hearts. They pervert the words from their proper places and have forgotten a good part of that which they were exhorted. And so it goes on. So the Quran is of the view that the Bible has been interpolated. And that's why we, in our arguments, we depended upon the actions. Words can easily be inserted into text, and biblical criticism now knows that there have been multiple versions of the Bible with multiple different sections of the text being removed and added. An easy example is the ascension of Luke. The ascension of Jesus at the end of Luke does not exist in the earliest scriptures. So we know, for example, therefore that there have been interpretations of the Bible. This issue that you raised in terms of how likely is a person to survive crucifixion? Simple answer is if God wants to save somebody, then he can do so. The more elaborate answer is that Josephus, as you've just heard, he saw 3 of his mates up on a cross. He asked them to be taken down, and one of them survived. I'm no mathematician, but 1 in 3 means 33%. I'm not saying 33% of individuals who were crucified survived. What it shows is that 33% of individuals survived if they were taken down and had medical treatment administered to them, which is exactly what happened to Jesus, because the doctor was there who applied, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus the doctor, they applied the healing herbs and they kept him safe in the sepulchre, away from animals, away from the elements, etc., where he healed. And when he came out, he was dressed as a gardener, had the wounds, told Doubting Thomas, feel my wounds. He had clearly fresh wounds from the whole event. So the answer is 33%, as far as we know, as long as you get medical care administered to you shortly after you're put up.
All right. We have about 9.5 minutes left in the Q&A, guys. So we are sailing along here. And this question is coming from AOC. Thanks for the support, AOC. This question is for Umar and Tahir. Based on what you presented here tonight, what would you say to someone who claims that you've been brainwashed from birth?
I think I'd represent all of the. Sorry.
Hold on 1 second. Make sure you don't appeal to the hypostatic union of Christ when answering this extremely well-developed question.
I think I would represent all of the evidence that we've given. We've tried to give a rational presentation justifying our beliefs. I think we've been successful in doing so. This looks like denialism, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a psychiatrist.
All right.
Well, I would say that the best way to respond to any of this would be, of course, that 1,900 years after the death of Jesus, somebody came along and brought everyone the truth that nobody understood, and then even corrected the Quran, even corrected the Muslims on the Quran when they didn't understand it either. And that was Mr. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who knew the truth, who knew everything. He was so wonderful. He brought all the amazing information, which our friends also, by the way, when we addressed, when I, for example, asked for evidence for early writings on Hindu texts, or early writings by Hindus that they saw some Jesus-like guy, they said they made it look like this is just some little side piece of evidence and all that. It's not really. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, whom they religiously follow and pretty much take as lords beside Allah by the Quran's own statements, by the Quran's own logic, because they take his word over Allah's word. He made it a very big thing that Jesus did indeed live a life after he was crucified, and that he appeared in India and so on. Bunch of nonsense that was written together by some guy who should not be trusted by anyone. So.
Marlon, I only used 30 seconds of our time. Can we use the minute and a half left?
No, if I may, I didn't answer at all, and Umar only spoke for 30 seconds, and I was going to speak, but then AP came in, which I let him. Do you mind if I just say something quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks. So a lot of that is just, unfortunately, completely false. We do not take the words of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad above the words of God in the Quran. This is just patent falsehood, and just shows his level of education, but also shows how desperate he is, that he's resort to open falsehood to try and make some form of a substantial point, which he's failed to do so. The reality is that we have not been brainwashed at all, and he highlights that, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad came 1900 years later. Well, actually, it was prophesied by the Prophet Muhammad that when the Messiah comes, he would break the cross. This was one of his major tasks. And by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam, peace be on him, demonstrating that Jesus in actual fact survived the crucifixion, and therefore there was no atoning sacrifice, and even identified his tomb in Kashmir, that is the fundamental of Christianity and utterly shatters it. And it may not be you, AP, and it may not even be your children, but I tell you, it will be your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and your great-great-grandchildren who will accept this understanding, because it is logical, it is sensible, and it accords to the facts better than appealing to the hypostatic union of Christ. We can all see you're gradually morphing from a Muslim to an atheist into a Christian.
How could we be so stupid that we do not see the truth that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was sent here for all humanity in the end, and that all humanity was led astray, that Allah allowed the emergence and the creation of a great false
all right,
religion
guys.
of
Okay.
Christianity.
Okay. Guys. All right, I'm gonna have to mute you guys. I'm gonna mute you. I'll have to mute you guys. All right, guys. Let's move on.
I was quiet.
Yeah. David, man.
Mockery is a proof of failure.
You started the mockery.
Okay, guys. All right, guys.
Yeah,
all right,
you're literally the hypostatic
we're-
union. You
we're-
did start the mockery. So
You mock, and then when we respond, you make it look like we are.
It's a valid point. You appeal to the hypostatic union of Christ. I didn't appeal to
All
it.
right,
You did.
guys. Okay,
you did.
All
Then
right.
you told
Guys.
Umar not to use it in his explanation. So that's clear
All right, guys.
mockery. So
All right.
yes,
Okay. All right. Even scale, guys. Even scale there. All right. Both of you guys did it. All right. We're good. All right. So we're about almost four and a half minutes there. And we're almost done. All right. So this question for David and AP. This question is not really in line with the subject matter that we're debating, but I'm running out of questions that are reasonable. That has to do with the subject matter. So this question is for AP and Dave. What is your response to the claim made that the Jews who seized Paul were believers in Jesus?
Oh, that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, you had the vast majority of Jews did not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. James, and you see this in the writings of Paul. You see it in the book of Acts. James and Peter were focused on sharing the gospel with Jews. Paul was focused on sharing the gospel with Gentiles. And so he's telling the Gentiles, which, by the way, Peter and James agreed with, the Gentiles do not have to follow the law in order to follow Christ. They can go directly to Christ. It's a different scenario. It's a different scenario with Jews who are born Jews and continue to follow the law. When Paul gets to Jerusalem, James says, hey, the Jews here, the ones who believe, they're convinced that you're going around the world telling Jews to forsake the law of Moses. We know it's not true. He's not saying, hey, repent. He's saying, we know this is a rumor that people are saying, hey, you're telling Jews to no longer be Jews, and so on. It is an interesting issue for Paul, because he believes that Jews ultimately aren't justified by the law. He's very clear on that. You're talking about like the Jewish customs and so on, the Jewish rituals and customs. Keep in mind, the original Christians, they kept going to the temple. They kept going to the temple. That includes the Apostle Paul. So what you have is James is saying, hey, there are people who are zealous for the law, who have believed in Jesus. They think you're going around the world telling people that Jews should reject it and become Gentiles. Paul reacts to this by performing the temple rites and so on. After that, you have Jews who hear about Paul, and guess what? There were way more Jews who were upset with Paul for going around preaching that Jesus is the Messiah than there were Jewish believers in Christ. So when it talks about, you see the trial, you see these guys coming up, right? You see these guys, they plot to kill Paul. Paul goes up and he has to stand trial and so on. Very clear that the people who were really flipping out and getting violent with Paul they weren't Christians who wanted to keep the gospel. That's Tahir's reading, not supported by the text. And again, once again, Paul goes on preaching the gospel in the presence of Jews well after that.
There is significant text within the epistles that is dedicated to resolving a dispute between the Jewish Christians or the Judaizers and the regular Christians who abandoned the idea that you should be circumcised and obey the law word by word and so on. This has nothing to do with the whole aspect of Jesus' death and resurrection and atonement and things like these. It is primarily and vastly about the law and how it applies to Christians. So to make it look like this is all about the death and crucifixion and resurrection and atonement and so on of Jesus is a deflection and is rather dishonest in all honesty. And it's just like making it look like the early Jews or the early Christians were called Ebionites. Such a thing didn't exist.
Yeah, Peter, John, James, they all believed in Jesus' death and resurrection.
If I can just respond,
go ahead.
I mean,
Umar, Tahir, go ahead.
So if you just read the passage for heaven's sake, okay? Paul, the idea that the Gentiles didn't have to follow the law is nonsense, actually. The Gentiles also had to follow the law. They had to follow a stripped-down version of the law, which James explains in Acts 21:25. As for the Gentile believers, we have written to them our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. So there was a watered-down form of the law for Gentiles. This idea that James was absolutely happy that the Gentiles didn't have to follow any law is nonsense. They had to follow a stripped-down version, a watered-down version of the Mosaic law. It is Paul who's going around not only telling people who are Gentiles you don't have to follow any of it, but he's also telling Jews that you don't have to follow any of it. And we have his letters, 1 Corinthians 9:21. How many times do I have to read it? When I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from the law. He goes on to say, yeah, I too live apart from the law, so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore, I'm not under the law of God, I am under the law of Christ. So he clearly, explicitly states that he is not under the law of God, being a Jew who was born and raised as a Pharisee. He then goes on, sorry, 1 second, he just goes on in Acts 21. James says to him, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. They have been informed of you that you preach against the law of Moses. And it's not just the customs. He says about circumcision, okay? He talks about to turn away from Moses, okay? So these are fundamentals of, and he says later, everyone will know there is no truth in these reports, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. So he tells Paul to repent, to show that he follows the law. Paul does this. This is an act of rank hypocrisy. He's been preaching
completely irrelevant.
All right, guys.
It's completely irrelevant.
Basis,
Jesus never died.
The basis. 1 second.
This has nothing to do with the topic.
Hey, all right. Let's not interrupt Tahir. All right, Tahir, go ahead, sum it up because I think your time is about up.
A question.
I'll finish on this sentence. The reason it's not irrelevant is because the whole basis, according to Paul, for the crucifixion is to get rid of the law. So the fact that James says that the law still applies to Gentiles and it still applies to Jews clearly demonstrates that he did not believe that the crucifixion was an atoning sacrifice.
Wow. All right.
It's simple.
And this would be where the time is expired, but this would be the final question for the Q&A here. And this question is for Tahir and Umar. And I think it has to do with referencing, not directly concerning the subject matter of crucifixion, but it has to do with the statement that was made about how illogical, like, the Trinity is, 3 in 1 and things like that. It says, this is coming from Fisherman's Corner. Thank you for the support. 3 dimensions are independent, yet make one object is irrational. Schroeder's cat, irrational. Particle wave, duality, irrational. How did God create these quote unquote irrational things that have separate but unified natures?
I mean, this is a big deflection. Sorry, brother.
No, go on.
This is a clear deflection from two things that are antitheses in their absolute natures, which is the nature of God and the nature of man. I mean, these are fundamentally different things. One is eternal, one is not. One is all-knowing, one is not. You know, one is holy and pure, one has the capacity to sin. You can't have two things which are actually opposites coming together. Now you're referring to.
This is a great point because I just want to highlight something. Go back to is he said David Wood said earlier that there's lots of things that have dual natures. No, things don't have dual natures that are mutually contradictory. Things can have dual natures that are complementary, but you can't have dual natures which are directly contradictory to each other. Omar, go on.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially the point. Referencing, things which have two aspects to their nature is very different to referencing things which are antitheses, like the nature of God versus the nature of man. To say that they coexist means that actually there is no nature of either of them in whatever being that is there. That is literally kind of contradiction, the law of non-contradiction, I think. So this is an irrelevancy, citing physical phenomena of things which have different aspects unified in order to justify the nature of God coexisting with the nature of non-God doesn't make sense.
May we briefly respond to that as well? Or?
Yeah. Yes, I want to respond to it too, AP.
For sure.
But I'll just briefly say, bull. I mean, a body and a soul are completely different kinds of things. One's immaterial, one is material. The Quran, I have the Quran here. This is supposedly has two natures. It's the eternal speech of Allah, and yet it's a physical book that has a beginning and an end. It's made of paper and glue and ink. Those are completely different kinds of things, and yet Muslims believe that the Quran has this dual nature. As far as God, even in the Quran, Allah appears in the fire to Moses, so Allah can enter into a fire and speak to Moses, but he can't. A fire is a completely different kind of thing from Allah, but Allah can enter a fire, but can't enter a human nature. It's just weird to put these kinds of rules on the Almighty. What did you want to say?
Well, I find it this whole topic arose when our Ahmadi friends brought up the idea that Jesus was apparently was repenting and was praying to God and was saying, "Let this pass from me," and was literally just reciting Psalm 22 and saying, "God, why have you forsaken me?" Which is basically the fulfillment of a prophecy. When I, in response to all of that, brought up that this is merely, this is understood to be depicting Jesus's human experience, which has great significance in the entire narrative of the gospel, then the Ahmadi side started banging on about the hypostatic union, which is very funny because I didn't say anything about. I gave examples of the divine and human nature. I even gave different examples. My example wasn't just the hypostatic union. I don't know why we are so focused on the hypostatic union. I said that it was understood that Jesus has a human experience, which serves a certain purpose, and there have been in Christology numerous different ideas in order to explain Christ's nature, his divine nature and human nature, and how to reconcile it, and so on. It is not considered controversial that Jesus has a human nature while he's also divine, or that Jesus has a human aspect while he's also divine. If you want to discuss about the different aspects of Christology, you can continue and discuss about how logical or illogical that is to you. However, that is completely irrelevant to the point at hand, which is that Jesus was merely expressing the human experience.
All right. Well, guys, that wraps up the debate and Q&A. I appreciate you guys for a very lively debate, entertaining debate, and educational debate. I definitely appreciate you guys' efforts and everything. And so, this was a two-part debate, right? We first debated is Muhammad the true prophet, and now we debated the crucifixion concerning the Bible or the Quran, and I thought both of them were great. And I just, once again, I want to appreciate you guys and show some gratitude to you guys. I would like to send out a gift to you guys, to just a piece of just a thank you note from me to you. I know you're shaking your head, Ty, here. You're saying no, but yes.
Marlon, I must say, Marlon, listen, Marlon, the reality is the hero of this old show has been you. You've been such a good moderator throughout both debates, and you've been completely fair. You're a passionate Christian, and yet you've been so fair to us. I can honestly say, hand on heart, I don't think any Muslim moderator would do any better than what you've done. You've done a great job.
I appreciate those words. That's encouraging.
I agree, Marlon. You don't need to send us anything. We're all good here. We all like the job.
Yeah, this is your gift to us. Thank you.
I like that. I like that you were both strict and fair. So we all appreciate you.
All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate you guys too, man. So I always allow you guys to say parting words, man. You can show some love, be direct, whatever it is, man. Parting words before I let you guys go. David and AP, what do you got?
I'm not sure if you said party words or parting words.
Parting words.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Marlon, for this debate. Thanks to our Ahmadi opponents. I have to say, during our first debate, things got a little bit dirty. So as soon as I saw a little bit of a dirty attitude, I also went into it. This time, it also happened a little bit. That said, I don't have any hate or any animosity or anything at all against our Ahmadi opponents here. In fact, I appreciate them because it's a great change from how we usually interact with other apologists from the other Muslim fields. So despite our disagreements and all the petty stuff, thanks guys, and no thanks to you, David.
My thoughts, it's kind of along the same line. I can argue with someone and be absolutely, forceful and stuff and not have any ill feelings afterward. There are certain people, like they're saying they're going to slaughter me in the name of Allah or something like that, that I would have a problem with. Arguing about disagreements over passages and so on, I don't have any, I don't walk away enraged that someone disagrees with me. I've always had kind of more of a soft spot for Ahmadis than lots of other people, just because, as I mentioned earlier, my best friend in college was a Muslim and he was an Ahmadi, and it was just weird for people to come along later and say they're not real Muslims. Like, what are you talking about? He just spent the last 4 years trying to convince me that Muhammad's a prophet and that the Quran is the word of God. Seems very, very, very weird to me to say not Muslims and so on. But with all of that said, it is very strange to me to come to such a radically different conclusion about something that Jesus repeatedly said, something that his disciples said, something that scholars are unanimous on, something that 20 centuries of Christians have agreed on, and even to depart from the vast majority position of Muslims over the years. And it all happens to line up with what Mirza Ghulam Ahmed said, and so it looks like that's where you're getting your views rather than going to the evidence and letting it speak. Because again, keep in mind, I mean, I started as an atheist. I became a Christian because I became convinced that Jesus rose from the dead. AP is not a Muslim or a Christian. He believes Jesus rose from the dead. So we're seeing something. Are both sides, where the two sides, we're seeing something that the other is not seeing. And so anyway, explore that more in the future.
AP, what are you throwing your hand up for? AP was going on.
Whatever, continue.
What are you saying, AP?
Nothing.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Here, Newmar. You guys got it, man.
I wanted to give the Jesus of the Gospel the last word. In Mark, Jesus answered, the first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, with all your strength. Hopefully we can all follow this.
Amen.
And I will finish with another quote of Jesus. Father, Father, what shall I do to enter the kingdom of heaven? Follow the Lord.
Nice.
All right, guys. All right.
Everyone
appreciate
said
you guys.
goodbye in the nicest way except David. He had to attack again.
What?
Nothing.
Marlon,
All right, guys.
I said you've done a great job in this.
Thank you guys, man. Once again, I think you guys are great, man. I think you guys are great debate quads, I guess. Debate partners.
If you need us for any other debates, just let us know. Just email, yeah?
All right, for sure. We'll do, man. So
Hey, Marlon.
Yes,
I have to say it would be interesting. It would be interesting because they just gave you an open invitation to set up more debates. Might be interesting to get a debate on a topic that Ahmadis and some other Muslim group disagree on. The reason I suggest that as a possibility is you would not have a side in that debate, and therefore you'd be an impartial moderator on an issue that between different Muslim groups where they disagree. So anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, it's not, just to be clear, it's not an open invitation. Obviously, we'd review the topic and stuff, but we have.
Obviously.
Because of the way you've handled these debates so nicely, we'd love to. If there's a good topic and good speakers, we will, definitely respond.
All right, cool, guys. I appreciate you guys once again. You guys enjoy the rest of your day and or your night. I think Omar Tahir as nighttime. So you guys go ahead and enjoy the rest of your night. David, AP, you in the States, AP?
Yeah.
Where you at? Where is it?
Hey, don't be asking in the podcast, Marlon. Tahir and Umar, we have no issues of thinking they want to brutally murder AP. Sure. There are people who would like to murder AP. So.
For sure. I understand. I totally understand. Keep it quiet. All right, for
Central
sure, guys.
Time, that's right.
All right, Central Time. I'll leave it at that, Central Time. For sure, guys. All right, guys. You guys go ahead and take care. I'll talk to you guys soon, all right? Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Peace be on you all. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye. All right, guys. Another great debate in the books, guys. I hope you guys have fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Lively debate. And this is the thing, this debate, the debate format was actually recommended by David, right? And so this goes to show that the format can be just as entertaining, because I have people emailing me, and I heard some comments too say, oh man, we should have like a real cross-examination where it's question and answer, question answer, question answer. And I threw that at the guys, and both team said, nah, that's okay. Let's keep it the way it is. Right. This goes to show you that for different formats, even though it's not what you desire, can be definitely informative in nature, and without all the crazy banter back and forth. Like we see a lot of times in debates, we get so caught up with the banter that now the subject and the substance of the debate is thrown out the window. And as you guys know, over on the Gospel Truth, man, I want to make sure we have substantive debates to where we can converse about very, very rigid disagreements, right? I mean, volatile disagreements, right? And we can discuss these volatile disagreements in a nature that's helpful, right? And not chaotic and disruptive. Right. And so that's what the goal of the Gospel Truth is, to be able to have these engagements for the gospel. Right. We're not just having conversations just to be talking about Islam and Christian. We're talking about, these are debates that are geared around the gospel. So everything that was discussed, I'm praying that it does draw Tahir and Umar to saving grace. Even AP. AP's not a Christian yet. But we're praying that AP does become a Christian, right? And that's the goal, right? Even though AP argued very, very valiantly for the Bible and for the testimony of Scripture as far as the crucifixion, I'm just waiting for AP to go ahead and, come on over, AP, come on. But all that said, the gospel is at center here, right? And that's the goal of these debates. We're just not having a conversation just to be talking. That's not how I roll. That's not the vision of the Gospel Truth. But I just want to point out and just make sure we understand that we can have conversation. We can have debates, even if we disagree on these subject matters, right? And so I'm just happy that these two debates, the one previous was Muhammad a true prophet, and this one was the Bible, the Quran, which makes sense concerning the crucifixion. I'm just happy that they both came together and they both did very well. I saw Slam RN, one of my great moderators. She said that we had 1,400 likes just in this stream alone, and it has to be a record. I think she may be right, because I can't recall any stream having that many likes before the stream ends. And so right now it has 1,460 likes. And so, not to say that's all I'm paying attention to is views and likes, but I think it just points to the fact of the substantive nature of the debate, right? And getting certain guys on that can draw a crowd, so more people could hear the substance of the debate, right? And what I think it does, it shows the gospel truth in a certain light, to where, yes, people who have a great following are people who want to come onto the gospel truth. And as you guys know, I don't just invite the guys, the popular guys. I invite the guys who just do ministry. You know, they're not necessarily on YouTube or have a great following. They just like to discuss these things, right? And so I say all that to say is that that's the vision of the gospel truth. So if this is your first time viewing the gospel truth and you're like, what is this about? You know, what's going on here? What is this? This is the vision of the gospel truth, right? Proclaim the gospel of Christ via debate, right? And when I'm able to bring people on that do happen to have a great level of following, that's just more of the gospel being put out, right? That's just more gospel being sent out even further out. And so that's why I like to mix the bag, guys. That's why I like to mix the bag, because, you know, I have guys who don't necessarily have a great following, and I have guys who do have a great following, and you mix the bag, right? You know, you mix the bag, and I think that's beneficial for the gospel to be sent to all the masses out there. And so I just want to say big ups to everyone out there who supported the ministry, who've been supporting the ministry over the years. This ministry has been in operation since 2019. And so I just want to say big ups to everyone who's been through it when the gospel truth had 2 viewers, all the way to when the gospel truth now, we had, I think, a high view of 1,500 people in one stream, right? And so that just goes to show that God is blessing the ministry, God is moving the ministry, and we just got to keep going, right? We just got to keep going. And once again, thank you for the support, not just monetarily, but also liking and subscribing and sharing. That is support as well. And I do appreciate everyone out there who has done such and subscribed to the gospel truth. So yeah, thank you guys once again for all you've done, and it's looking good. It's going in the right direction, and praise be to the Lord. Praise be to God for his grace and mercy on our lives. And yeah, you know, if you have yet to do so, subscribe. You know, that's the key. Subscribe to the gospel truth. Please do that. Support the ministry, and hit the like on the way out. As Gabriel just said, let me bring Gabriel comment up here. Hit the like, guys. Hit the like. You know, before you jet out of here, all right? All that said, you guys go ahead and enjoy the rest of your day. I am about to go enjoy the rest of my day, and be blessed out there. I hope to see you guys soon. You guys take care. God bless. Have a good one.